You're watching Medfield TV.
Welcome to the Medfield Board of Selectmen December 3rd meeting. Just like to remind everybody that this is a meeting that's being recorded by Medfield TV and live streamed. So if you have any comments, if you would, please grab the microphone and identify yourself and your address. The microphone is not for broadcasting here in the room, but for picking up the audio channel for rebroadcast on the TV. So don't expect your voice to be amplified. Before we start, if we could just take a minute to express appreciation for our service members serving across the world. Thank you. Okay, the first item that we have on our agenda is the public hearing for our annual tax classification. So I declare this is now a public hearing that's open. And Yvonne, I think you have the floor. Please. Yes.
Did you want to read the ad, Gus? Or?
I will be happy to read the ad because it's got my signature, or it's got my name at the bottom of it. So, the Medfield Board of Selectmen will hold a public hearing on Tuesday, December 3rd, 2019 at 7 p.m. in the Chenery Meeting Room, second floor, Townhouse, 459 Main Street for tax classification purposes. The central issue to be discussed during this tax classification hearing is whether all 5 classes of property, residential, open space, commercial, industrial, and personal, shall be taxed at the same rate or at different rates for fiscal year 2020, in accordance with Mass General Laws, Chapter 40, Section 56. The Board of Assessors will provide relevant information regarding the tax rate, including the fiscal effects of all available alternatives. Interested taxpayers are urged to attend the hearing. Written and oral statements from interested taxpayers will be accepted by the Board of Selectmen's office and taken into consideration at the hearing. Gustav H. Murby, Chairman, Board of Selectmen.
Should know what paper that ran in and what date.
Yep. That ran in the Medfield Press on the November 22nd, 2019 edition.
Okay, great, thank you. So I prepared a small presentation so you can see it on the television. So like Gus said, every year by statute, the Board of Selectmen must basically vote to split the rate or not. It is the responsibility of the Board of Assessors to provide the Selectmen with relevant information to help them make their decision whether they want to split the rate or not. I'm also going to talk tonight about correcting a misconception that I've heard that splitting the rate would increase the amount of money the town can levy, raise, or generate. Okay, so the tax rate. A uniform or single tax rate or a split tax rate, both communities must decide whether to tax all classes of property at their full and fair cash value. So that share would lead to a single tax rate. If the Board of Selectmen were to decide to shift the rate, the taxes on the commercial, industrial, and personal property, they would be paying at a higher rate than the residential properties. Okay, so adopting a residential factor of 1 would result in the same tax rate, and this is what the Board of Assessors recommends and what we've always recommended. If they decided to split the rate, they would have to adopt a residential factor that was less than 1. I always give this every year. This is an analysis of the surrounding towns. I use last year's tax rate because not all of the communities have set their 20 tax rate yet. So as you can see, Dover, Norfolk, Millis, Sherburne, and Medfield all have a single tax rate. Walpole and Westwood, our 2 other neighbors, do split their tax rates. And as I was talking about before, the residential rate you can see with Walpole and Westwood is significantly less than the commercial rate for their communities. The other important part about this chart is the residential percentage is listed. So all of those communities have a residential percentage that is greater than 90%, which means their commercial is less than 10, and they choose to have a single rate. So, as I just stated before, historically, Medfield has always maintained a uniform or a single tax rate. Shifting the tax rate would significantly increase the taxes for the commercial, industrial, and personal properties, while the residential properties would only benefit from a small savings. And the main reason for this is that, again, the commercial, industrial, and personal properties represent a very small percentage of the town's total taxable value. Okay, so I give two scenarios, an overall scenario and then a individual scenario. So this is the overall scenario. So this year's projected share of the levy for the commercial, industrial, and personal properties is almost 2.8 million. Last year, it was 2.6 million. If the Board of Selectmen chose to shift the rate, up there on the screen, you could see the differences. With a 10% shift, they'd now be paying over 3 million. 25, they'd be paying almost 3.5, and with a 50% shift, they'd be paying over 4 million. So this is how a uniform tax rate looks with our tax levy. This is what I like to refer to the budget pie. The big blue piece is the residential pie, which for the upcoming year is projected at a little over 46 million out of our 49 million. Commercial, you can see, is 1.644, industrial 521, and personal 625. If the selectmen were to adopt a 50% shift, our tax levy remains the same. It is still 49 million. It doesn't change. The only thing that changes in this is that big blue piece gets a little smaller. So our residential piece goes to 45 million, commercial would go to 2.4 million, industrial 782, and the personal 938. So I just again wanted to point out that our tax levy, what we can raise, generate, does not change with a shift. Merely what happens is our commercial, industrial, and personal property pay more. So, and this is how that last piece of the pie would break out with the individual scenario. So with an estimated tax rate of 1783 for a property worth 650,000, we have a residential and a commercial. So with our single rate, they both are going to pay 11,590. I'm just going to jump down to the 50% shift because those are the two pie charts I showed you. So with a 50% shift, a residential property would now be saving only $345, where the commercial property valued at the same would be paying $5,795 more. So you can see there is a big differential if the selectmen chose to shift it. So here is just some more historical information. As you can see that the commercial, industrial, and personal percentage hasn't really changed that much since 2015. It's right now projected to be 5.6%. And you can see they're still paying about the same amount of the levy as they have in the past, with assuming a single tax rate. Okay, and this is just some more information. So for 2020, our single-family average is going up to $676.5, and the average tax bill will now be over $12,000. So again, the Board of Assessors recommends that the Board of Selectmen vote a residential factor and adopt a uniform rate. Does anybody have any questions?
I actually have one that's just informational, commercial, industrial, and personal. That personal part is actually primarily our on automobile, so,
Equipment furnishings and things like that.
okay, so
And
it's not the vehicle taxes, okay.
No, our motor vehicle excise tax is a part of our local
separate
receipts.
thing, okay.
Yeah, it's separate.
And that's worth of 2 million now, is it, or?
Yes. We estimate that at about 2.1.
Yeah,
I have no questions.
I have no questions.
Any statements, questions, or observations from the public? In case, I guess we'll entertain a motion.
Close the hearing.
We close the hearing before the motion, okay. We don't do enough of these for me to get. So I'll hereby declare the public hearing closed I will entertain a motion.
I would move that we adopt the recommendation of the Board of Assessors for a unitary single tax rate.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Elaine.
I just need you to sign the LA 5.
Okay. Like right now?
So
All three of us need to do it. Oh, that's why I asked the question. Our next item of business, the Council on Aging's presentation was postponed. The next thing we have is a discussion for FY21 budget, including the capital budget, and I think we have members of...
We're actually gonna, Mike Pastore's not here yet, so we're gonna actually hold that until he arrives.
Okay.
So we can continue on. John Thompson has something to present.
All right, John, you have the floor.
Thank you.
John Thompson, Chairman, Buildings and Grounds, Medfield State Hospital. Wanted to revisit the proposal we talked about a little bit before Monday the 8th, and it has to do with doing some roof maintenance on 3 buildings. The first building was the chapel on the west side, about halfway down the side of the building. There's a section of brick in the soffit where water is coming down the slate and has got up under the slate, and it's now visible on the inside of the chapel. It's getting behind the stucco work that is up against the bricks. So that was the first task that I had the contractor look at. Second one was Building 12. Building 12 was used by the Department of Youth Services. It's a building that had already been remodeled inside. It's on the north side of the campus. It was formerly Ward B3, and inside it has, for instance, maple doors and carpeted floors. I think I might have brought you in there on one of the tours.
Is it the one in front of the R building, John?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
thank
it
you.
is, Pete. Yep.
That was the one that was redone under the Dukakis administration?
Yes. Yeah, they spent over $1 million on the R building and 12.
Well, I thought they spent 12 million.
Probably more, yeah, more than that. I mean, it's been de-leaded and it's been asbestos remediated as well. So that one's worth, inside, there's a valley where water collects in valleys when it accumulates on a rooftop. And when that freezes, the ice gets up underneath the flashing that protects the valley. And so there's a rafter in there that's getting wet, and I've been keeping 5-gallon buckets up there, but I'm getting tired of emptying buckets. So that was the second building, and the third one is Building 17. That was formerly Ward L1. That was the convulsive ward for women. It's in front of the water tower, and this particular roof, rather than a valley issue, it has a issue on the west side on the slate work, where if you go up in the attic, you'll see an area that's about 10 by 10 that has little, like, quarter-sized or half-dollar-sized holes. You can see the sunlight coming through, and I think if we don't address that, it will get significantly worse. So those were the 3. And he'll do other work. He will do some work on some of the ridge caps. The ridge caps are the copper flashing that you see on the ridges on the building. So we've had this tremendous wind recently that's peeled up some of those ridge caps, which can also get problematic over time. I don't know when he could start this, because with the snow on the ground, they really can't bring in the lifts yet. So this may not even happen until next year at this point. But I thought at least we would maybe get it in the queue.
I don't have any questions.
Questions, comments?
I had thought that we had approved some contracts for roof repair for you. Was
No,
that
we
just
talked about possibly going forward with the chapel, but, I thought I'd wait until we had got by November 8th first. See
All right.
what-
Well, these all make sense to me to do.
And the estimated cost for that, even though the roof caps have been added, it's still
Yes,
the same?
he'll do that. And we're in communication with him every day while he's working.
Yeah.
So,
All right.
yeah,
What
Mark.
are the estimated costs on these?
It's like 21,000.
28,000. Exact number was 28,229.
That's for all 3?
Yes, for all
So
3.
you're well underneath,
Yeah, there's a
39.
50,000, cap on his quote. Yep.
John, are there any issues on the R building?
The R building, it went for over a year with one of the roof hatches open. We finally got up there and closed, and I've chain locked those so nobody can open those. No, the R building's fairly good.
Okay,
The,
good.
the engineering building has some water leaking in it, but I don't think that building's gonna survive the master plan work, because it just isn't contributing to the history, and it's not really needed.
That's the one by
It's in a
the
very
overlook?
valuable piece of property, but it's not really contributing to what we'd use in the future.
Is that the building by the overlook?
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
yep. I keep tools in there,
Yep.
so.
John, on the topic of the R building, so with the zoning change that passed, actually, part of the R building extends into the area that's designated open space. I'm assuming that that's a building we all expect is going to come down in a redevelopment?
I think that was
Okay.
what the planning committee had. I don't know how developers will look at that, in that building was one of the ones that was remediated.
One of the newest ones,
So
yeah, I
that,
know.
It's in the
I
best
mean,
shape of any building up there, so. it
yeah, the
doesn't make economic
National
sense.
Guard has used it. They've done some of their civilian support team work in there, so it's a good building for that kind of use. And I showed it to several movie scouts in the past, but it just hasn't fit with the scenery that they
Right.
want. But
Right.
that building is structurally very strong, and a lot of money was spent on it. So there's, as I said, there's no lead paint in there, there's no asbestos in that building. It's in good shape.
Where I was going with that is if that building, in fact, regardless of whatever it is not a building that's likely to stay, then I would assume any maintenance we would do with that would be
Just,
basically
Band-Aids.
avoiding safety hazards.
Yes.
It's not really trying to keep it ready for some future use.
yeah, I've actually kept the security fence around the perimeter of that
Yeah.
intact and kept that locked so
Yeah.
people can't get in there. And it's very well sealed now.
Okay.
And it was part of the state prison system for a while, but there's no glaring issue in that
Okay.
building.
Yeah, you can probably only convert one penitentiary to a popular bar.
It's got some beautiful, I
Like
mean,
in
the views
Boston.
are beautiful at the back of that building. I mean,
Yeah.
that field is beautiful,
Yeah.
so we'll see.
Okay. So a motion to approve that expenditure.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Yep.
Aye.
Great, thanks.
Thanks,
Mike.
John.
Thank you,
Yep,
John.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
Mike, do you need a moment to catch your breath, or are you ready to? All right, well, then, the next item we had was the FY '21 budget meeting, which is including the capital budget discussion. And I think I'm going to turn this over to the warrant committee here.
I'm actually as tall as Gucci when I stand up.
When I'm sitting.
Yeah, when you're sitting, right. I think child number 7 is probably taller than me at this point. 9 is on the way. How's everyone doing? What's going
The
on?
reason you're standing right here?
I
You get a lectern right over there, you know.
I do what Christine tells me to do. Usually poorly, but
Anybody else want to come up?
We prefer a more familial approach around here. Norman.
I thought the town already decided they wanted Gus up here, not me.
There was a tentative decision.
All right. What are we here to talk about? Mike Pastore, Warrant Committee Chair, Selectman, Town Administrator, thanks for having me. We're in a bit of a different posture this time than years past, so I'm happy to talk about whatever you want to discuss. But I think in the first instance, Christine and her team have been rolling out kind of this new process in dealing with the budget. It's been I think it's been going great. Warrant Committee has been really happy with the changes and supportive of everything that Christine and her team is doing. We'd certainly ask that everyone involved in the budget understand that it is in many ways a transitional year, and there are going to be some bumps in the road, but we all work together and row in the same direction, whatever platitude you want to throw in, and we'll get there. in years past, I think this address from the warrant committee has been kind of a, give budget guidance, which in many ways has been kind of an aspirational number. But this year I understand that that's sort of already been done. We're in process. Many of the departments, I'm told, have started to get their worksheets in, which is great. I think just like any year, the earlier we can see those worksheets, the better. But again, back to the changing the process. I think it's being streamlined to the degree that we can get a fuller picture sooner, which obviously we're all happy about. So I'd like to introduce the warrant committee, talk about a few slight changes to our process, and maybe a couple of things that we're going to be looking at in the next year. Does that work for everybody? So again, Mike Pastore, Warrant Committee Chair. We have Sharon Tatro in the front row here. She's our Director of Numbers, which is a new position this year. And I believe Bob Sliney and Jeremy Marcette are in the back. I think that's it for Warrant Committee members in the room, but Amanda Hall, Christine Barden, and Joanna Hilbert are all reprising their roles, and and Newton Thompson as well. For those of you counting, that's 8. The warrant committee is usually 9, and we're in the process of getting that 9th member. Little different this year than last is that we're changing the way that warrant committee members are attached to departmental budgets. And in years past, it was basically the warrant committee member and the department chair. This year, we're trying to alter the framework a little bit in that the members are attached to the budget in general. So anyone that has that has any role in your budgetary process, we want to know that early. If there's any assistants, any other employees, any advisory committees or other committees, we want the assigned warrant committee member to be in touch with them, basically to minimize any surprises a week before town meeting, because we don't like surprises. Particularly that time. And we're, I don't think every department head's here, so I won't go through the entire list. But if you want to grab me after, I can tell you who your assigned member is to the extent they haven't reached out yet. And, we'll definitely be reaching out to all the department heads in the next couple of weeks. As we go through the process. As far as things we're going to expect, other than having budget worksheets in early and often, any changes, tell us as soon as you know. Any big items. Again, try to minimize surprises. We will this year, as we tried to do last year, be looking historically, looking at historical turnbacks. Certainly not to punish anyone for giving money back. That's a good thing, but we do want to make sure that budgets are an accurate portrayal of what we need for the next fiscal year. Additionally, we'll be looking at revolving funds, how they're used. Last year, many of you will remember we had a number of questions in that vein, and we'll continue to look at those. So it's really kind of general ideas, but happy to talk about anything more specific if anyone up here wants to chat.
I have a few things if you're.
Please.
So I've tried to change the title of this meeting, since Mike left, and I've called it Budget Guidance, and I've called it the Budget Kickoff Meeting, and everybody, and Jeff actually did it to me just yesterday. Oh, so you mean the doom and gloom? I said, no, I'm really trying to change the name of it. So it's the doom and gloom. So apparently, even though we tried to change it, it's going to stick. So just to go a little bit more into what Mike did, in the past, you would have all gotten your budget packets tonight, and then we would have sent you off with some guidance. We've changed that process. everybody already has their budget packets, so in best case scenario, next year, this meeting's actually in September. So you'll have September and October before you meet with Nick and I. So I'm actually pleased to report that I think we have 97% of the budgets have been turned in and ready to go. Now, some of that, Jess Riley actually was looking for some of the spreadsheets. I just like paper. I know you do. We spent a lot of time in the past years giving you estimates at this meeting. We would actually rather give you our actuals for our budgets the first meeting of the warrant committee. So you'll get a full picture at your first meeting of what our revenues and our expenditures are. Now, let me just preface how we gave the guidance to department heads, which was level funded or cuts. And that was based on a phone call we received earlier this fall from Moody's Investment Services. And it was an unsolicited call. I don't think Georgia hadn't remembered in the 25 years or so she's been here that we'd ever received a call from Moody's asking us about our financial position. And I actually have a memo for all of you about that. And basically what they were saying is we've reviewed your fiscal year 18 and your fiscal year 19 financial standing, and we're concerned. They thought we used too much free cash to balance the budget. They did not like that we were not replenishing our reserves, and they issued a very stern warning to us that before you go out for the Dale Street project, you have to make a commitment to bolster your reserves. So we showed them that in the fiscal year 20 budget, we had a budget guidance policy and we stuck to it. We only used $500,000 in free cash. We put more money in stabilization, and we're developing a 5-year capital plan. So they were pleased with that. They didn't downgrade us on the spot, which is what we expected during that phone call. But still, we're issuing guidance to everybody to be as fiscally conservative in the budgets. The ones we've been reviewing since September, most of our department heads have adhered to that. We have very few requests for new employees, and most of them are level funded. And we're hoping to present that to you in January. However, one of the things that concerned us is that we met that budget last year, only using $500,000 in free cash, because we eliminated all of the capital budget. So our focus here tonight is to talk about the capital budget. Eliminating capital every year is not sustainable. Getting to the end of a budget cycle and saying what's left over for capital, definitely not sustainable. So since August, Nick has been working on a true 5-year capital plan that you're going to be shocked to find out it's $138 million, because we've waited every year in March and said, what's left over? Hey, we have 250,000, we have 300, what can we do with that? Without actually looking at any sort of replacement schedules. It's a very similar process that you'll remember we did for our buildings and created the Building Stabilization Fund to address the same kind of issue. So tonight, Sharon Tatro, who's the chairman of the Capital Budget Committee, is going to present some of our capital scenarios, and that's really where our focus has to be on the budget going forward for fiscal year 21. I don't have any more seats.
Welcome to come up.
Okay, so to that end, the Capital Budget Committee has met weekly almost for the last month and a half. And the big discussion that we have really gone through is that we went through everybody's requests. We did spend some time kind of refining how we thought some of those things should be paid for. So on the larger 5-year plan that exists that I see you have on the large pieces of paper, there are some new columns we added. We might have decided some things maybe shouldn't come from the general fund, it should maybe be raised by donations from the town, things like that. We have not actually voted on every single line item within that, because we got to a point we wanted to prep for this meeting and to be able to say, how are we going to attack this problem from a larger perspective? And if we actually did everything that was in that plan, how are we going to do that, and what does that look like? And so we went through a bunch of different scenarios. We have kind of a top 2 scenarios that we wanted to talk about. The first choice of the Capital Budget Committee, and to kind of, didn't really want to get into the weeds of what all of the things are, but one of the highlights of this is the need for fire trucks. And as we all have kind of, I think, heard around, is that we have 2 fire trucks, that one is really non-functional, and the other one is very close to being that way. And so if you replace 2 fire trucks, that's about $900,000. And that's a very significant cost to the town. And to try to do a plan that not only solves all of our other problems plus the fire trucks, really led us to the first suggestion that we are making is that we treat the fire trucks as a separate issue. And that we would potentially do some kind of debt exclusion for those fire trucks in and of themselves at town meeting. And then alongside that, set up a capital stabilization fund. And we went really back and forth a lot on how exactly that would work and how much money should be in that. It's very similar to exactly what we did at town meeting last year in terms of the municipal stabilization fund, but this is for everything else. And I will say the vast majority of these things, there's a lot of cars, vehicles that are not the fire trucks. There's cruisers and there's lots of other things that we've neglected over the years. The vast majority of what we tried to keep in the capital budget last year were the vehicles, and they were all the things that got kind of left on the cutting floor the week before town meeting. So we really have a significant issue with that. And I know that if anyone has questions on that, Chief is here, and she has some really nice pictures too of that situation. And so although we could kind of arbitrarily come up with a number, what we really tried to say was what is kind of fair to the town and what can we sustain, knowing that we have different things like Dale Street coming up. And so our proposal was to do a $850,000 capital stabilization fund. And even when you do that, it does not fund everything on this list. Over the 5 years, you're going to have a deficit of not being able to pay for everything on this list, which, as I said, we haven't vetted 100% every single thing on this list. The things that are remaining in there in the general fund, I think it's safe to say that the capital budget committee felt that they were reasonable requests. I think it's more about a timing and is it the right way to pay for it or different pieces like that. But I don't think that you have anything on your list that anybody felt was a want rather than a need. And so the issue with that, as I said, is that it doesn't do everything. But that is something we felt was really reasonable, and that was the first choice of the capital budget committee. The second option we spent a lot of time talking about was, what if you did $1 million capital stabilization fund, but you tried to also handle the fire trucks within that? If you tried to do both fire trucks in the first year, then nobody gets anything. So really the proposal that is alongside that is that if we did a capital stabilization fund for $1 million, we would do 1 fire truck this year, 1 fire truck next year, and then see how that goes. The issue with that is that it hits you at even larger deficits of not being able to do all of the requests if they were deemed necessary. And then a third scenario that we put together just to look at would be kind of a combination of the two, which would be to do the 2 fire trucks. And then if you raised the capital stabilization fund to $1 million from the $850, that is the one option on the table that actually would fund everything that's on the list and would give you extra in case something happened that we don't know about now because it's 5 years down the road. So if you want to know what option actually would grant every single thing on that list, if that is something that the town and the warrant committee and the selectmen all feel like it should be, the way to solve your problem is that one. Yeah, so the third option that solves all of our problems is a debt exclusion override this year for the fire trucks alone. So that's like a $900,000 override for just the fire trucks, and then establishing a capital stabilization fund for $1 million. Yes.
How long with the $1 million stabilization fund would it take to cover the $138 million?
Well, the 138 million has $90 million for Dale Street School. So you need to back out some of those things.
Yeah.
So there are some very large numbers that are getting you up to that. There's also like a $15 million number in there for a potential park and rec building. So when you bring all of those things back down, and we're,
Counting building projects as capital.
that's exactly right. That's where the 138 million. So when you pull out those things, it's not as scary of a number. It's still a really big number. The school roofs and, yes, but those things are gonna, remember, like, roofs are in more of a the municipal fund, or depending on its size, you know, potentially a different exclusion. Like, clearly, Dale Street School is gonna have to be its own separate vote, right? So if you end up needing to do some other, you know, 8 or 10 million project for some reason, that probably is gonna end up being a separate vote that's not gonna be able to be sucked into that. This fund is more for having a very strategic way to solve these problems so that these things don't get put on the cutting room floor. I've been on the warrant committee for 6 years, and these are always the things that get lost in the end, and they need to stop getting lost. And we had a big discussion about, you know, so you really can't absorb these things back into the operating budgets, or else we're talking about an operating override. And the danger with that, in my opinion, and I know other people in the committee's opinion, is that if we did this, put this override in as an operating override, I'm not gonna be on the warrant committee forever. We're all, you know, everybody's gonna change, you know, selectmen change, volunteers change. If we put an extra $1 million in operating and said we're always gonna use it for capital, 5 years down the road, that might not happen. And then we're gonna end up in the back in the same spot. So if we set up a fund that it has to be used this way, it'll solve everybody's problems, in theory. In theory. And then it would work similarly to the municipal stabilization fund, that, you know, we would vote for the million, but then at town meeting, we're still gonna have to present the projects and how they're gonna have to be spent. So it's not like giving somebody $1 million check they just get to write. The town is gonna get to participate in what actually gets funded every year at town meeting. And so then nobody loses control, if that makes sense.
I also would like to add too, if we do go along with.
We need to, oh, hey, right there.
Thank you. I'd also like to add that if we do go along with scenario 3, that will be a very positive aspect with regards to Moody's, our rating agency. That's going to show that the town is committed to its capital projects before we add additional debt of, could be approximately $80 million.
Sharon,
Yeah.
I'm actually glad you asked the question you asked about the 138 million, because I somehow totally missed this. When we passed the municipal stabilization fund, that was intended to be the fund that would give us the capital funds that we needed to maintain our buildings. And the question came up, well, is this the fund that generates the money to pay for new buildings? And the answer was no, this is maintaining our buildings.
Yep.
With the question you asked, I suddenly realized that what we're looking in here includes things like a school and a new major building, and it's occurring to me that's not what we should put in this fund. This should be a capital equipment stabilization fund.
That's right.
That takes care of all the non-building, you know, we make building decisions and fund those however we do it. So
And-
first,
yes.
just so everyone knows, I absolutely applaud what we're doing here. Is we're being more proactive, more deliberate, more disciplined around the capital expenditures that we should have to maintain what we own, and to do that in a way that forces us to really look at that over time. And rather than putting that as the last decision that gets made, you know, when we look in our pockets and see how much change is there at the end of the budget cycle, it's now at the front end that says, no, this is all programmed in, we're committing to this based on what we believe we need to maintain. So I agree with this for that reason. I agree with it for the funding, you know, the stability, in terms of our financial stability. But if we took the picture out of, if we took the major building construction projects out of this picture, it would be helpful for me to know what then that stabilization fund needed to look like. And in doing that, I would recommend that we look at, what we ought to be able to say is if we can pass this stabilization fund at this level of funding, and it'll go up 2.5% a year unless we really don't think we need to do that. If we can put the stabilization fund in place, the goal here is that we never have to come to the taxpayers for additional money.
Right.
We've set this at a level that allows us to have the funds we'll need when we need them. If it grows too big, we can always ratchet it down.
Yeah.
But that number may be different if we take that out of the equation.
Well, it's so, this piece of paper that you have here, this talks about, these were the scenarios that would show what would get paid out of the capital stabilization fund. This takes all of those building pieces out.
It does take them out.
It does take it out. So this in particular sheet, so if we went with the $1 million capital stabilization fund, but did the fire trucks separately, at the end of next fiscal year, we would have extra left over in the stabilization fund of 62,000, and then as that rolls forward in 5 years, we would have a surplus in that account of 484. But that assumes nothing changes and we did everything on the list.
So if we did that, okay, so that's helpful. So if we
So this
had-
particular sheet does take all of those big building projects out.
And it takes out as well, Gus, just if you go to the big sheet, anything that is funded by some source other than the general
Right,
tax
right.
levy.
Right.
So as part of the process, we went through and identified other sources of revenue. The idea was with the 138 million was kind of for the first time to have a picture of everything. So we're not in a situation where we are now, where we had a partial picture of some stuff, but then we kind of, through no fault of the fire department this year, suddenly have 2 fire trucks that are on here that have never been on a capital budget before. Or we don't want to make capital budget decisions if we know down the road, 6 years from now, we're going to have a new building. And so we have to factor that into what the overall costs are.
Right.
That was the idea.
And the other thing is that when you see on that, there's a column that says like donation. So for instance, there were originally suggested, some things that were playgrounds or lighting for the tennis courts or for the athletic fields. We pulled those things out and put them in the donation column, so they are actually not funded through this. Because we just felt that those were things that maybe the community could help participate in and would not get funded through this fund. And I think that just as time goes on, when those projects come up, if for some reason those donations didn't happen and the town felt that they wanted to put more money to that, then there could be a discussion as to whether or not they could go through this fund. But the way this recommendation is set up, it assumes that they are not paid through there.
So here's the story I take from this. First, philosophically, that stabilization fund makes sense to me. Without really looking at numbers, $1 million sounds like the right number. The 900, and I'm not trying to advocate for that, but it's round, it's understandable, and it's big enough that it might be reasonable to say, so don't ever come for us looking for more money than that if we bite the bullet here. The real issue then would be whether the 2 fire trucks for estimated 900,000, whether we would want to replace them more slowly and force that into that $1 million flow, or whether we would say, look, we do understand that we've been basically shirking our responsibilities for capital maintenance. It would be probably a good thing if we can do it, to basically, as we launch this $1 million a year stabilization fund, to goose the problem to start with by throwing another one-time
Right.
$900,000 in for the trucks. I don't know whether that's a good idea or a bad idea until I know where we sit with the whole budget, but
Right.
it seems to me, in terms of looking at these alternatives, is the stabilization fund a smart thing? Yes. Do we know exactly how much? No, but it's probably closer to $1 million than 300,000.
Yeah.
And are we in a position to be able to accelerate digging ourselves out of a capital maintenance hole by kicking in an extra $900,000 in this coming fiscal year, or $450,000 in this, whatever the number comes out to be,
Right.
above and beyond that stabilization fund this one time, just to take care of that emergency?
And that was definitely we spent a lot of time talking about that in the committee, and we definitely landed on taking a 1-year hit to deal with the fire trucks, because we're already down one fire truck and we're limping along with the other.
Right, and there's an added, just, and Georgia can speak to this as well, there's an added benefit to the town of doing some small amount of borrowing now, because we have a couple of other smaller bond issues that have to go at the same time, and so the interest we would pay, I think it says in the water tower, the interest we'd pay on the bond anticipation note for the painting of the water tower would be roughly equal to the fees you'd pay if you did sort of these three different bond issues together. So we had talked about that quite a bit as well.
So I was planning on borrowing the water tower, the painting for the water tower, as a short-term ban, a bond anticipation note, only because we were not planning any other long-term borrowings. So to do that, that would be a 2-year ban. It costs $1,000 a year to renew it, and it's about $9,000 in interest a year. So you're at $18,000 right there. Affordable housing still needs their $1 million. I am told that they're going to need that sooner than later. And the other piece is the fire trucks, the $900,000 for the fire trucks. So if we can lump that into our long-term borrowing, we can save some of that short-term interest of $18,000, apply it to $30,000 of borrowing costs, and I think we'd be ahead of the game. Our debt is slowly coming off from fiscal year 20 to 21. It is going down about $600,000. Now's the time to add your debt. We still have the $1 million in the school building authority, the other financing source that we have that goes away in fiscal year 23, which coincidentally would probably be the time when we could possibly add $80 million in debt. So it does make sense to, it does make sense to do the debt exclusion for the 2 fire trucks and lump it in with a long-term borrowing for the water tower and the affordable housing.
So what I think I hear in all, I just need to think in simple terms. What I think I've heard you just say is, well, if we choose to go down this path, there's a financially relatively painless way that we could do that. It's prudent at this time to look at doing that, and it would not hurt us as badly as it might under a different interest rate environment or a different financing structure. Okay.
I think one of the other things in doing the 5-year capital plan is that we now have a pavement management plan, we have a vehicle replacement program, so that we shouldn't have an issue where we have a year where we need 2 fire trucks. We're going to know a significant amount of time ahead of time, and we can plan for that.
Right, and just as with the municipal building stabilization fund, if this is the way we go, you wouldn't necessarily be spending it all in 1 year either. If you had larger projects down the road, for example, if you look into the future, speaking of the roofs, right now, our projection in the capital budget is that we will pay the debt service for the roofs out of the municipal building stabilization fund over that period of time. And so if you had a large expense of a fire truck coming down the road, you'd be allocating some of that money over time. And there might be some year-to-year fluctuation, but the hope is, just as with the buildings, you'd smooth it out. And so you're not going to have spikes, right? And I think the reality is the spike that would come from the fire trucks, if we did go that route, would be sort of still making up for something we should have been accounting for over a much longer period of time, and that we were not. Just as with the buildings, we should have been accounting for a lot of those expenses over a period of time, and we didn't.
And that's why I brought up the $1 million, because if we, there were a couple of scenarios here where the number for that fund would have been less because it was a function of what we needed this year. And my point is, if we're going to do this, let's do it to where this is the discipline we hold ourselves to.
Yeah.
And that probably means we have to be a little more than just what we think we need this year. We have to look at the longer range on what we need to fund each year in order to meet
Yeah.
in a way, it's kind of like what water and sewer tries to do with their capital, is when we set rates, we don't just have them go all over the place when you try to plan for it. So.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time about, like, we didn't want to just say $1 million, so, but, 950, we do it, but like, what's the difference? There really isn't, and $9.99.99 bargain, but $1 million will solve the problem.
Could I just ask, just to step back a little bit, and for the benefit of people watching at home and others who've not been in the weeds on this, Christine or Nick, could you just describe the process for these proposed expenditures for getting on the capital plan, because I think, I don't think, we don't want to leave the impression that everything every department asked for just found its way onto here and we're figuring out how to pay for it.
Right.
So you could describe the process we went through, because I think the philosophy from the Capital Budget Committee is similar to what we did with the municipal buildings, which is to maintain the things that we have. And so the idea is this is the capital that we think is needed to maintain what we have now, to maintain the level of services that we're providing currently under the current kind of framework of the services that we're providing. And that I think that if we want to spend less than this, then the choice is not just we're going to have 2 less cruisers. We'll decide, well, we'll have 3 fewer police officers. So we've decided we're not going to cover this as much, or we're going to have we're going to plow the roads less often, or we're not going to plow the sidewalks, and we're not going to have a sidewalk plow. It can't be the philosophy before, which is we can continue providing the same services, but just kind of stick it all together with duct tape and gum. And so I think that's the
That work's
discussion.
going up too, Michelle.
That's the discussion that we'll have to have if we want to not do these things. Now, again, we can talk about the funding things either, because this proposal here, which I am supportive of, is like my third choice for what we'd be doing. But I think that was the philosophy, was to have capital that would support the services we're currently providing, not adding new services. Do you want to just describe,
Correct.
Christine, how we
So-
got to this point as well?
So we asked every department head to submit a 5-year plan. Now, in the past, we had asked department heads to submit a 5-year plan, but we were only looking at the first year, and we never held them to what was on there. So any item that they submitted had to be a minimum of $5,000 and a useful life of over 5 years. We then incorporated all of those, and they also had to provide us with their source of revenue for the project. So it was not us coming up with the source of revenue. We were asking them to look at it first. And then every department head met with the Capital Budget Committee and walked through all of their requests. And we've taken a few of those requests off the top that were new services that we didn't think was something we should provide. There were also some new services that we asked people to use fundraising efforts for. So we're anticipating next year this process will be done in the summer. We got a late start this year, so we won't need everybody submitting new capital requests. Their capital requests are on here for the next 5 years. We're just looking at what comes for fiscal year 2026, barring any emergency that's unforeseen. Anything else that comes forward will not be included in the capital plan for this next 5 years. You will have to wait till the 2026.
I think that's good.
Christine, you mentioned the.
Microphone.
I think they're wired up in the way. You mentioned the vehicle replacement plan. Could you describe that a little bit more? Because I think some of the questions you're going to hear from the public are things like, didn't we just get new vehicles? What does a vehicle cost? I remember that being at town meeting, and so on and so forth. How many vehicles do we have? How many fire trucks do we have? How many ambulances do we have? When did we get replaced? What year was that? And
So
I could go on. This is past experience from other towns as well. So, I mean, you're going to get those questions. They're probably already on Concerned Citizens, I'm sure. So.
So one of the things that we talked about is we're basically going to have a capital budget roadshow. Similar to when we did the municipal building stabilization project, and we started talking to people about what the benefit was, and we will have all of that information. We'll start putting all of this online, all the backup materials that the department heads provided, along with a full list of vehicles. Now, you're going to see in the first year, there's a significant number of vehicles requested, and that is partly due to the fact that we haven't replaced any of the police vehicles in several years. And there's a certain replacement schedule, and the chief can speak more to it, a certain replacement schedule based on the fact that they run 24/7. So you don't look at them on mileage, you look at them on hours of use. And we'll have all of that in our special presentation just on that.
And if people don't believe the state of the fire trucks, are they invited to come inspect them for themselves?
They can inspect them. I believe I still have video of the one that caught on fire in the station, so they're welcome to look at that. And, anybody who wants to come down and look at the pictures of the buildings of what we have is fine. I'll stop short of a ride along, but that's up to the chief.
Right. So I think just to summarize it and Sharon, you did as well, I think you really have, three options. Assuming you agree that roughly we need these things, we need the police cars, we need fire trucks and all those things. The one option would be to do with the operating budgets this year what we did with the capital budgets last year, which is to say, last year we cut the capital budget down to avoid the operating. This year we're going to essentially keep the operating budgets level. and truly level, not level in a government sense where it goes up 3% and you say it's level. Like level means the actual numbers would be exactly the same this year as last year to try to squeeze in this into the general tax levy, right? That would certainly be the most taxpayer-friendly approach to doing this, would be to continue to fund it off the general tax levy. I think, if I were, Supreme Ruler of Medfield, that would be my preferred approach. I think the reality is nobody would stand for the level of service cuts that would come along with a budget that was essentially level funded or that would be up by less than 1%. I think there'd be significant service cuts, almost certainly, and we then end up in what the likely second scenario would be, which would be an operating override. And so if you don't think the town would actually stand for the level of service cuts required to kind of keep this within a Prop 2.5, you're then comparing the effect of an operating override to the stabilization fund, assuming the numbers are the same. I always prefer, myself, any sort of tax that's easier to get rid of or lower, and that's not permanent. And so the advantage of the stabilization fund over an operating override is that if it turns out to be too much, or if we do a better job of getting grants, if it turns out things are less expensive, that over time, contrary to everything else, some capital costs are lower, it's much easier to lower that amount. So if it turns out as we go ahead, let's say we set it at 900 or a million or 850 or whatever the number is, and it turns out we think there'll be too much of a surplus, you can just stop the increases or you can lower it. And that just resets the thing, and it would always be a popular thing for the selectmen to do, to simply unilaterally impose a lower tax. And so I think and it protects, it saves us from ourselves in the future. And that, as Sharon described, you won't have the sort of budget creep of what's happened over time. Because I've seen it being on the Capital Budget Committee for several years. You start aspirationally that it's going to be, $400,000, which was mostly a number kind of plucked out of the air. And then as you get near the end, these things come off and they're cut off and the rest of it, and you end up with the same kind of capital deficit that we have. So I think that's, from my perspective, kind of why we landed in this place rather than someplace else that I might prefer.
I'm delighted to see all of this. It's the sort of fiscal discipline that I've been hoping for a long time, and it makes absolute sense to me. I was a little shocked by the 142 million, and I started trying to subtract out the buildings, and I'm really delighted to hear that we can do it for $1 million a year, so that I didn't get down that low when I was working through the sheet. But no, I mean, this is the way that we should be running the government. This absolutely makes sense, so thank you for doing it.
Welcome.
So I almost agree with everything that Mike just said. Except for one
Best I can
thing.
hope for.
Yeah, that's as good as it gets. Here's the one thing that I don't know if we have a point of disagreement or if it's only a point and we would actually agree on the caution. I do like where this is headed. I like the philosophy behind it. I like the proactive nature of it. I like the fact that department heads will have to think 5 years ahead of time what their real capital needs are and make the case for it. And while we probably have some degree of flexibility if needs become more urgent over that 5-year period, that's all stuff that we can deal with in the planning process and not get hit with just before a budget has to go in. The one thing that I am concerned about, and this is a broad statement, not a specific statement, is that as a town, we need to learn how to live within our means. One way or the other, we need to learn how to live within our means. The people that are paying taxes, for the most part, and there are people who are doing well in this town, I get that. And there are people who are just doing like most people do. And they're not seeing 4% increases in their salaries. They're seeing something well less than that. And every year, when we tell people who are not seeing 4% increases that they need to have a 4% increase in their taxes, what we're telling them is that this local government has a better idea of how you need to spend your money than you do. If we're going up about like they are, then you're paying kind of what you into it, and we all do more. But at some point, we need to get real. If this if I'm picking million, it's not set, I understand, but it's an easy number. If there's a $1 million stabilization override that we pass, that takes care of the capital and it puts it on a more rigorous basis. If in the first year that we do that, it's simply a neat one-year gimmick to embed $1 million override, and then everything else that was in the budget originally, we move the capital out of the operating side, but we pretend like There was nothing there to start with, and we don't have to actually take a look at the remaining operating budget without the capital in it and take a good hard look at it. Then what we've done in this, all we've done is we found yet another way to do a one-year trick. Last year, the one-year trick was, let's pretend there's no capital spending, and then we don't need an override, but we basically allowed spending to go up. This year, we might say, let's have $1 million override and pretend that we don't fund capital out of the old operating budget, and then we'll deal with reality yet another year from now. And I understand that this will be difficult. I understand there will be hard decisions to make, and almost any decision we make has a constituency that says, yes, that's a problem, we really should get in front of it, but don't do it in the part that we care about. This is the part, let's fund this part, and then we'll have somewhere else. And when we do that year in and year out, we don't get to a point where we have a town that's living within its means. So my caution is, and I'm not expecting $1 million to come out, just for the record, we didn't put $1 million in last year, so I'm not expecting that. But I would hope that the Warrant Committee and its efforts would not forget that when we pull the capital budget needs out of what we used to call the operating budget, that has always been a real amount of money that was there. And if we pull that out, we should be doing our best to make sure we've adjusted what remains to take into account that piece has been removed from the operating budget.
So Gus, I'll tell you, I don't think we have any disagreement at all. I mean, because the actual amount that was in the budget before, again, it was $300,000 to $400,000. It was not $1 million. But where almost all of that money is going to go, where all of that money is going to be in reducing our free cash usage, continuing to reduce that. It's going to go in the increase, this year will be a 10% increase to the OPEB trust fund, and it will go at an increase to the stabilization fund. And so this is not freeing up, this should not be freeing up any money for additional operating expenditures. I mean, because in addition to the capital deficit that we had, as Moody's had identified, and we had identified before, I mean, it was fortunate that we had identified this issue before we got this call, and we had adopted the policy previously, so that what we were able to show Moody's was that in the fiscal year 2020 budget, thanks in large part to Director of Numbers Sharon Tatro, I mean, and the Warrant Committee's efforts to keep the town committed to the policy we adopted, our budget last year was compliant with that policy. And so to continue to be compliant with that policy, there will be additional money in what we call the operating budget that will be allocated to reserves. Because we have to continue boosting the reserves, we have to continue holding free cash where it is, in order just to get caught back up to where we are now. I mean, given the decline in the MSBA fund, in order to hit that number at 2023, we've got to have additional contributions. And so I think we have no disagreement on that at all. And as I said, I mean, if I was the single voter on this, I would say we're just going to bite the bullet on the operating side and deal with it and reset kind of the total level of services we're providing on the operating side in the same way we did to accommodate the capital. I don't think that's realistic. I don't think people will stand for it. And so I think we do have to accommodate kind of the level of services that people want in town. And so I think this is kind of, from my perspective, a compromise that gets us there.
And I would just add, I don't disagree with either of you. And in my 6 years on the Warrant Committee, last year was the first time we actually only spent, like 500,000 out of free cash. It's normally like $1.2 million. So if you think about it, we have been using free cash when we have been doing capital. And then we didn't do any capital last year, but we stayed truer to the free cash and the stabilization. So if the fiscal policy going forward is to keep with that theory, to not keep going into free cash, you have to do something about the capital.
One thing I would say about that is part of that, at least in some years in the past, is, and I'm bringing this up, Mike, because you brought up the Warrant Committee's looking at actuals and trying to wring some of the fluff, whatever you want to call it. Part of why that worked in a number of those years was because the free cash balances we had came in higher.
Absolutely.
So in other words, departments they got budgeted, they turned the money back in, the free cash was higher than projected, and then we threw more free cash, but never really totally destroyed our free cash balance.
Right.
So if you do have on the Warrant Committee a process for wringing that excess out of the
And
budgets,
I
then
think we
would
really
expect
started
the
that
budget
last year.
increases would go down, and then you can live with a tighter free cash cycle.
No, I think you're right. And I think we really dug into that for the first time really last year, getting to the point that we were able to have a balanced budget without needing to do an override last year, kind of forced that process. And so we just need to keep it moving.
Thanks, Sharon.
Okay? All right.
You don't want to stay for the rest of the meeting, Mike?
You know what, I wish that, oh, look at the time.
All right. People are leaving. Just a personal observation, some of the work the warrant committee's done this past year, everybody knows the warrant committee does budget analysis and things like that, but with this special town meeting that came up with the state hospital, I know there were several warrant committee members that had to do what they were gonna do without the benefit of being able to rely on numbers, and yet they still had to kind of try to do a business perspective and to offer their business advice as a warrant committee on what was a good thing to do. And I at least personally appreciated the mental flexibility of the warrant committee members that I dealt with that were doing that, trying to come up with a responsible view in the absence of reliable numbers. That's harder than when it's just a budget. So thank you for that. Okay, let's see, next item, vote, I think we're on to action items. First item is vote to accept a gift of a parcel of land from Michael and Teresa Taylor, 609R Main Street. And I believe that the write-up on this indicated that this was something that had been approved at the April town meeting. So, is there any, Mark?
I had prepared the deed for the Taylors and had anticipated that they would have executed it, which they have not done, even though we understood they were coming in. So there's two approaches, among others, but I mean, you could, I suppose, vote conditionally to accept it once it's executed and then come in and it's got to be signed and notarized as the acceptance. That's kind of messy. The other alternative is I don't know if you're planning to have another meeting this month or not.
I think we are. I think we're having one more, right? Yeah, we are.
Well, then I would suggest you just put it
defer.
over. We've already explained to the Taylors that if they want to be able to take the advantage from a tax standpoint, it's up to them. I've done everything that we need to do.
Okay. That'd be my suggestion, we just defer.
Good for me.
And why don't we do that?
Let's table it.
Yep. Okay. Next is a contract that Maurice Goulet had, DPW Director, requesting selectmen to vote to approve the following contract with Eastern Minerals, Inc. and Champion Salt LLC. Term is December 3rd, 2019 to December 2nd, 2020. I guess we'll do these one contract at a time, so.
Move then.
So first contract is the Champion Salt contract.
I think those are two different companies, Eastern
Yeah,
Minerals.
so Champion Salt, I think, was the primary supplier because they had the lowest bid on the salt.
Yes, I think Eastern Minerals is going to be our secondary
They're
supplier.
identified as a
Yep.
supplemental supplier, I think, in the contract is the wording of it. So start with Eastern, Champion Salt. You moved to, yes, I think you moved that
I
to
move
approve it?
to approve both of them, actually.
I second.
And all those in favor?
Yep. Aye.
Aye. Eastern Minerals.
I move to approve,
Eastern Minerals is a supplemental supplier.
well, we just voted to
No,
approve
just,
that.
we just did, we did one at a time, one contract at a time, so.
Well,
I move to do
Play-
them both.
Work with me here, Pete, come on.
So
He's
moved.
trying to expedite.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay. And then the next contract that Maurice had was for
Recycle.
E.L. Harvey for the recycling. And before we act on that, I have a pet peeve of getting contract documents for our signature that don't make sense. And so, on this one, on the contract itself, it says that the contract documents consist of this agreement together with the contractor's pricing quotation through email for scope of work and compensation only, attachment A. And then scope of services, contractor shall furnish services related to the program in accordance with the scope of services provided in attachment A. Attachment A has two emails, neither of which actually describes what the scope of services is or what the actual pricing is. There's one of the emails that suggests that they would continue for the rest of this calendar year, which is all of 4 weeks. at the existing rates of $170 per haul, a charge of $70 per ton for the SSR and rent of $55 per box. So one of the emails is addressing what they're going to do for 1 month. The other email doesn't actually say what they'll charge, it just says that they can't charge what they did in the past. So I find this to be an inadequate contract document if we're supposed to sign it.
Let's have Mo present it when he gets back.
Okay. So,
I mean, I was assuming that the numbers were asked to approve. I get what you're saying, Gus, though.
Yeah.
Was 180 for the transport, 85. We're going from 70 per ton to 85 per ton, and then it would still be 55. That's how I read the October 24th email. I agree, you should have some more detail than
so
you.
let's just ask, yeah, I mean,
That's how I read it.
let's just ask Moda.
If there's an issue in between now, you can get it clarified and give you a better document. I didn't actually look at this,
Yeah, okay.
so.
So it's just, what gets me, when we sign, I mean, road salt, I figure you can't screw up what it costs.
Well, he
but-
carried forward contracts from the previous years.
Yeah, what I'm getting at is that, what worries me is when I read a contract and I don't understand it, that suggests to me that nobody read the contract before it came before me for a signature, and that's what worries me, is when that happens. So I kind of use that as a litmus test to see if anybody actually was paying attention. In this case, I'm not sure. Okay. So 2 approved, 1 deferred. Next is Yvonne Remillard, Principal Assessor, requests the Selectmen to vote to approve a contract with Patriot Properties for computer licensing and software support, and in the amount of $8,300.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. Next one, Sarah Raposa, Town Planner, requests the Selectmen to vote to approve an award supplement for ZBA review of the Aura at Medfield with Tetra Tech, and in the amount of $23,284.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Okay, that one's approved. Next one, and Sarah, this is one we actually pay, we are paying this week, pay for, the $5,000 supplemental from,
Mass Housing is we don't pay at all
pay
for
anything
it.
on
No,
that,
Mass
right.
Housing pays the
Right.
consultant for his time with our ZBA.
okay.
So that's the amount of $5,000.
Right.
That's
not-
the
Do we
supplemental.
not have to do anything on that? It was in the packet.
You don't have to, you have to sign the supplemental award letter.
That's what I thought, so
Yes.
I don't see that. on
It
the-
didn't make it on the agenda. It went into the packet and didn't make it onto the agenda.
Oh.
And that is my fault. Sarah gave it to me and I was on my,
So town
right.
council,
To add
can we
for it.
approve the $5,000 that the town doesn't have to pay because the state is actually doing it? So this is, or do we have to actually put it on, it probably doesn't matter, we can put it on the next agenda.
I don't know what it is, so
So-
I can't.
It's the supplemental, it's actually the contract between the Mass Housing Partnership and Paul Haverty acting as the ZBA's 40B consultant. So
So it simply
the-
provides that he's being paid from somewhere else, but as far as the boilerplate, it's all in the
Yeah.
contract?
I think we're accepting the.
We're accepting the award.
We're accepting the award.
Yep.
If you want, I mean, does it matter if we wait 2 weeks? Or does it
It-
matter if we don't wait 2 weeks? Or it's like it's an
the work's already
administrative-
commenced anyway, so probably doesn't.
So in real world terms, it doesn't matter. All right, why don't we just hold off till next week, and then we'll keep it administratively clean. We'll hang on to the last thread of legitimacy we can still cling to here.
Gonna muster
Okay.
that.
All right. Let's see, this looks like consent, we didn't actually call it a consent agenda here, but.
No, there is a consent agenda later on.
Can I actually clarify the vote that you did take? That was for the ZBA to engage Tetra Tech.
Correct.
That is a contract that is being paid for by the applicant. So again, it's
So we
no
don't pay
town
for that
money
one either.
either.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay,
Okay. Thank you.
thank you, Sarah. Good thing you're here. Okay, member requests a parade permit for the annual holiday parade, December 7th, 2019, at 1 PM. I assume if we don't approve this, they won't let us march in it, and we all want to be in it, so.
Oh, now you've got me worried whether I've got a financial interest or something in that. So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay. Next one, request to vote to approve the following 2020 alcohol and common vittler licenses for Avenue, Basil, Jing's Garden 3, Kingsbury Club Medfield, Noon Hill, Nosh and Grog, and Takara.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. And let's see, a request to vote to approve the 2020 all alcohol package store licenses, Bullard's, Palumbo Liquors, Medfield Package Store, which is Larkin's. Do I have to recuse myself because my kids would never forgive me if I vote against this?
That's
Okay.
where you shop.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Yes.
Aye, approved. Okay. I can
That's
joke
definitely
about-
one that affects more than 10% of the town, Mark. It's not.
I can joke about them because they don't watch these videos. All right, request to vote to approve the 2020 wine and malt beverage license for Medfield Wine Shop, Medfield Commons, which is the Gulf Station on Main Street.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Yep.
I approved. Okay. Next, request to vote to approve a 2020 Farmers Brewery pouring permits for Seventh Wave Brewing and Zealous Beer Company.
And that's actually the pouring permits, because they already have the licenses from the state for their farm or whatever they are.
Is it so it's the Farmers Brewery pouring
Actually, what
permit.
you're approving is their right to serve for consumption on the premises.
That's what we thought. But if that's the right term for it, it's the Farmers Brewery pouring permit.
Pouring permit, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Yes.
Aye, okay.
The important ones made it on the agenda.
You were sitting there thinking, oh, these are going by so smooth, and they haven't called me out yet here. It's like the worm will turn.
I
Okay.
am curious as to why the number of people in the race might be from such a large disparity. I guess you don't know how many people are going to show up, huh?
Weather.
Okay.
Okay, we'll get to that. Request to vote to approve the all 2020,
Common victual.
yeah, but there's nothing
Those are the
listed.
non-alcoholic ones.
But there's nothing
suggestions.
listed?
She's just approving all of them.
That's,
All,
yeah, Casabella, Royal,
all of them. Okay,
Dunkin'
well,
Donuts.
Anybody as of December 3rd, 2020, who's selling food for commercial purposes in Medfield?
It already holds. a
Already has
commercial.
It
one.
already has one. so
Right,
it's
they're
renewals.
renewals.
Okay, all right, just to keep the record straight here. Okay,
So moved.
Second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
See, if you'd been after that one, you would have.
They don't have the level of regulatory oversight that the alcohol stuff does.
Clearly. Okay. Let's see, Fire Chief Carrico requests the selectmen to vote to authorize Town Administrator Christine Tweerweiler to sign the HGAC Cooperative Purchasing Program contract and to vote to authorize Chairman Murby to sign the mutual aid agreement with Norfolk County Control. So these are two different things.
Two different things.
The first one, interestingly, is a company out of Texas.
Yes.
Which I found interesting. And the second one is our mutual aid agreement with Millis. You want to do those one at a time, or do you want me to compromise and?
No, do them separate. They have nothing to do with each
separately?
other, really.
Okay.
I would move that we authorize Christine to sign the HGAC Cooperative Purchasing Program contract.
Second.
All those in favor?
Yes.
Okay, next.
And I would move that we vote to authorize her to, you, Chairman, to sign the mutual aid agreement with Norfolk County Control.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Yep.
Okay, that's done. Licenses, permits, consent agenda. So we usually, I hate doing this to you. We usually do these all together as a consent agenda, but I do want to talk about this particular request from you. Yeah, and so let me deal with that one first.
Yeah.
There's two things, I mean, one, like Pete, I had the idle curiosity of 15 to 50 and how to think about that. The only reason, looking at the map, I think it's reasonable. I think even with 50 people, it's reasonable. The only thing I want to raise with the two of you is when you wanted to do the last run there on Green Street, we had neighbors that were concerned about it. This feels to me like it's a small enough group that it's not, and plus it's not a complicated thing anyway. This feels to me like this would be okay for us to, if we're inclined to approve it without making sure the neighbors aren't gonna get upset. But I am mindful of the fact they came to the last meeting to not want us to do this, and I at least wanted to touch base with the two of you to see if you thought this was, I mean, certainly with 15 people, it's not. With 50, I still don't think it is, but. so-
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, because my question, I had similar questions about this one, right? Because it looks like you're not looking for any road closures.
No.
And so it sounds to me like this started out as something where it would not necessarily be that distinguishable from just a running club getting together and running all together. And maybe you got more likes or whatever they are, hearts on Instagram or whatever it is. And so now you think it might be more people. And, you know, there's no regulatory approval needed for a group of people to get together and run, right? If there's not going to be any road closures, you're not going to be blocking the streets, you're not going to be doing the rest of it.
This is not a one-day alcohol license?
No, this is just a request for a run, and so I don't know that you're actually asking us to do anything, because usually when we get an approval for a road race, there's a road closure involved. There's some requirement of a shutdown. Here, it sounds like that's not the case, and so my question when I read the email was like, well, why are you here at all? In other words, we'd have no reason to stop anybody from getting together in your parking lot and running.
Well, it sounded
I
like it
think
was a courtesy to us.
Well, I think it's because I put it on there, because anytime we have 50 people running that are parking and based out of one business in the downtown, the chief should have some say in that, whether or not there actually does need to be any road closures or any assistance along the way. She wasn't so concerned with the 10 or 15 people, but 50 people caused her pause that you should meet with her and just discuss rather quickly to make sure there's safety measures in place.
So are people paying to run in this event? Is there a fee or something?
There's no fee, no. The plan was, you know, to answer your question, the reason why I don't know how many people are going to show up is we do quite a lot of events from our space, and it's a little unsure how many people are going to show up. It's because we only started in June. So as a tap room, we introduced different events, and some are a lot more popular than others. This one we did post, and we got a lot of interest. It was well over 50, but I suspect that those are the numbers based on interest that I would say it'd be somewhere between 50 and 60 if you had to push me on it. And no, it's a free event. It's run totally out of our tap room. We have obviously done lots of other runs out of there. The only reason that I brought it to your attention is because of the numbers of people who are interested and probably will be involved.
So it's a screening thing, because you're essentially road commissioners, so you would at some point have the authority, like with the memo holiday parade, to determine whether or not it's sufficiently disruptive that either some precautions have to be taken or you say no. So it's more like a screening thing.
And in regard to the other race that I came in before you that had a lot more proposed runner. That was an official race. This is not a race. This is just a jog, if you like. And you're welcome to come along if you wish in your sweaters. But it is a lot less people. And I think those people who came to comment was mostly because of parking, which seems to be the main cause for concern.
And you were proposing to close Green Street for a good chunk of time.
That's true, yes.
As well, that you were going to close that area right in front of, because you wanted to have after the race, as I recall it, sort of a little festival in the parking lot, and that was part
Yeah,
of
they
the
were looking for
concern.
a one-day permit for outside
Yeah.
service.
So I definitely see this as different. That was my question. I mean,
So first, thank you for checking. Second, I think our predisposition with businesses in town is to do what we can to help you. Would it be reasonable for us to ask you to get with the police chief?
That's absolutely fine, yes.
Confirm that she's okay with the 50 to 60 and to comply with whatever, if she thinks that there's a need for a detail cop somewhere, you might have to do something about, you might comply with that. But beyond that,
There's no pre-registration for this?
No,
So it's whoever shows up, so.
exactly. Yeah.
there's probably more Vizslas that show up with VizWiz at the hospital on every Saturday than we're talking about running down Green Street, so I think we're.
But you may need a plan B if there's just an unexpected outpouring. And,
I think you can approve it pending meeting with the police chief so that you can have a plan in place if that happens.
So, that work?
Yes, thank you.
I would move that we approve it, subject to his meeting with the police chief.
I second.
All those in favor?
Yep.
Aye. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for checking with us.
Okay, then from there, I think the other items on the consent agenda we can take as a group. The first one, we got a request from the
Town
registry.
historian
It's
Richard
actually the
Sordo.
registry of deeds where they, I guess each year, as part of their documentation, they identify various service members from different towns to just commemorate them in the documents they put together. So Richard DeSorger, I think you took the initiative, or you either took the initiative with him or he took the
I
initiative.
did.
with you.
I asked him to make a recommendation.
And he recommended that we submit Admiral Jeffrey Allen Cook from the United States Navy, retired admiral, as the person that we would submit in response. And I think if we approve that, he was gonna send it directly, or should we do it?
He's ready to send it.
Okay, so we
He
can
actually
actually
emailed me earlier today to ask if he could send it, and I said, hold off.
Okay,
Actually, I think they've been putting out, there's 2 prior volumes where they've taken a notable person from every town in Norfolk County. And so they must be putting in a 3rd one together.
Yes,
right.
yes.
Yeah, so it's an honorary thing.
And Admiral Cook was our speaker at Memorial Day several years ago.
And Richard DeSorger was making that recommendation in his official capacity as the redesignated town historian. I think we should take his advice seriously in this area. So that's one. Second one, Sarah Raposa, town planner, requests permission to place a sign at Route 109 on North Street to advertise the open master plan 5-minute visioning survey. Presumably it'll take, oh, she's not here, I can't make the joke. I was gonna say, takes less than 5 minutes to read the sign she wants to put up, but she's not here, so the joke doesn't really play. William Pope, Zulu Gallery Director, requests 1-day wine and malt beverage permits for Saturday, December 14th, from 6 to 11 p.m., and first Thursdays in 2020, January 2nd, February 6th, March 5th, April 2nd, May 7th, June 7th, 5:30 to 11 p.m.
I would move the consent agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Yep.
Okay, good, those are all set. And then the next is a discussion. I had asked, I suspect you all would have been happy to do this anyway, but I asked Christine just to put on the agenda a general kind of a debrief discussion coming out of the special town meeting. Technically, the 3 of us never get a chance to compare
talk.
notes and talk about this unless we put it on the agenda, so it's on the agenda. Didn't anticipate we were necessarily gonna make momentous decisions or anything, but just simply to get a sense of where the 3 of us had come out after the town meeting.
Just for your information, we were notified this week from the AG's office. They've received the paperwork. They have 90 days to approve it.
Great.
Thank you.
I'm gonna-
So, I thought it was, just generally, I thought the meeting was interesting. I thought Scott did a good job conducting it. I think it was a little shorter maybe than some people anticipated. I suspect most people came, prepared and understood what they were going to do. I think it was obviously a close vote, given the requirement of 2/3, and I think just based on discussions with a lot of people afterwards, and again, it's anecdotal, but who reported voting yes, but it certainly was not, I did not take it as a ringing endorsement of the master plan or the preferred scenario or anything like that. I think that if there was a sentiment that gave the yes side the margin of victory, it was a sentiment to keep moving forward, but not necessarily to go ahead and try to make the master plan and the preferred scenario a reality. So I think there's still a lot of work for us to do. The one, and I had asked Christine to put something like this on here as well, because I think the one thing that occurred to me that we ought to talk about is what to do with the composition of the remaining committees, the 2 committees that we had. And I'll just sort of put on the table kind of my initial thoughts just as sort of something to shoot at. The first is I think we ought to probably only have 1 committee going forward. that's charged with this. I think essentially we ought to combine the master planning committee and the development committee, not necessarily the full membership of each, but not to have these two committees, because I'm not sure there's still a role for separate committees given what's going forward. I think whatever that resulting committee is, that I think we ought to look at the membership of the development committee. First, for anybody who kind of wants a chance to get off this ship now is the time. So if any of the members of the committee are thinking they may not want to continue, this is the time for them to get off. And I think we would benefit either way, even if they all want to come continue, benefit from expanding the membership of the development committee for the process of reviewing the RFQs and the RFPs. I think all of the attention that was focused on this proposal around the special town meeting probably increase the interest that people would have, and so we might get people interested now who didn't step forward before, who might have some of the skills and experiences we'd be looking for as members of that committee. I think it would be helpful to broaden that a little bit, given the focus that will be on it. And then I think this is another consideration that I had, and I don't know the answer to it, because I've generally been in favor of having selectmen on committees, and so that's generally my approach. And I think we should just think about whether it still makes sense to have a selectman on that committee or not. I think it absolutely made sense, and I think it generally makes sense. And so I'm not suggesting that we change that, but I think we should just think about it in terms of the substance of that committee's work, the independence of the committee, what they're going to be doing, the pluses and the minuses, and depending on the number of interested people we had. So that was kind of my main thinking as we moved into this, is we have an opportunity here kind of in December, January. Not much will be happening, to take a look at the membership of that committee, maybe solicit some additional interest. I know we got some unsolicited inquiries from people who might be interested in serving on the committee, and I think we would benefit from it. And if we did consolidate into a single committee that would be tasked with the next step, I would think we'd want at least one person who was a member of the master planning committee to continue as a member of the development committee if they were willing and able. So that was my general, kind of my initial thoughts coming out of the town meeting.
So I sort of mirror what you're saying, actually. I think that for me, the vote was an endorsement to see what comes next. And I think that, and I was happy that people want to see the plans that are actually going to get proposed to the town, and then we can make a decision about whether those are the things that people really are interested in doing once we see a real solid actual proposal. I think it does make sense to go forward with the development committee and see if anybody, reconstitute it at this point. I think that's a good idea. I hadn't thought about that, but that absolutely makes sense to me, so.
So the other consideration I had, because it had come up a couple of times, that if any of the current members needed to recuse themselves in response to an ultimate RFP, you wouldn't want to be on like a 4-member committee or a 3-member committee.
Yep, and I think Todd had mentioned that was a possibility, so, yep, another reason to reconstitute it.
So I think three of us are in pretty close alignment. I had talked with Todd, and he had recommended expanding the committee, which makes sense to me. I think the one person, I haven't had formal conversations with the people on the committee, but I think Ken Richard is willing and interested in continuing. I'm assuming Todd is as well. Johnny Martinez is the one who had identified early on that he had a potential, he could possibly have a potential conflict of interest. Given the job that he's done, I'd love to have him be on the committee as long as he can stay on it without having a conflict of interest. But I think that's a question for him when we get to an RFQ process. Whether, given that that's how you select who you might extend the RFP to, I wouldn't surprise me if he says that he has to do that. I agree with your thought of taking one person from the master planning committee and bringing them on, because I do think the corporate knowledge of what has led us to where we're at is important. My one major concern on the membership of this committee is that as I look at this now, we now have a business job to do, which is to issue a legitimate, high-quality RFQ, to down select to the right kind of potential developers that will be able to do something there that's what we actually are trying to do with the master plan. And we need an RFP that has the specificity and the controls in it to where a developer that responds to this understands what we're trying to do and the circumstances that we're trying to do it under, and can demonstrate experience at doing that and also has the control, that we have the controls in place to make sure that we keep the ship on course, assuming there's any developer out there that can come in with a proposal that is what we want. I, like the two of you, it doesn't, the fact that people are interested in keeping the process going and that this was no ringing endorsement of the master plan or of some specific proposal, that doesn't surprise me at all. That's the message we're trying to get out to people, is this is simply giving us a chance to look and see what the market can deliver to us. So I'd want a committee that's going to do its level best to get an attractive proposal that's consistent with the intent of the plan. But that's about it. And that may or may not make sense when we get down there. Mark?
Just to give you something to think about based on the comments you just made, the weighting process, weighting R-E-I-G-H-T, is critical to determine how much weight you put on
Oh, yeah.
compliance with the master plan. In other words, is that highly desirable that essentially they're proposing to build out the master plan, or is it something less than that, or what percentage are you going to give it? So those are the kinds of things you need to think about, because once that's out there, you're going to be bound to apply those criteria.
Right. No, I think that's absolutely right. Although I don't think we're getting into RPs now. I don't think you'd want to preclude developers from, whether there's one developer that wants everything or whether there's one developer that wants just part of it.
You got to
One
think
of the-
that stuff through in advance
I
before you
don't,
put
I
it on the
don't,
street.
no, I think we need to be prepared to listen to both, Mark, because what happened was with the responses that came into the RFI, one of the questions was, what do you think about the Arboretum versus the campus? And there are some developers whose interest is only the campus. There might be others that would want to do the whole thing. I wouldn't want to preclude either one, but I would like us to have the flexibility to pick one or the other. Because if it came down, if we could find a developer that was highly experienced and said, all I want is the campus, I actually think this town can figure out how to orchestrate the project on the Arboretum. On the other hand, if a developer came in and said, no, I want to do the whole thing, I wouldn't rule it out. What I'm getting at is I don't think we handicap that beforehand. If we can do it in an RFP, I think we want to allow it to be either
I
way.
think you're going to have to prioritize or something. You can't just
Well, the
throw it
criteria-
out and then wait to see what comes
Yeah.
in and then go through them. You've got to
You're
have
right.
some
You need
objective.
you need a well-constructed RFP. I mean, some of the comments I had on the Hinckley RFP have to do, I'm not disagreeing with you. You need to know what you want to accomplish, and you need to know how to construct an RFP
Right.
that lets you retain the control you want, but also makes clear what you're looking for. So if a developer's trying to figure out how to come back with a proposal, they understand what you're asking for, and they understand what you're going to value.
I think years ago, earlier in this process, I gave you all for your information a copy of the Inspector General's report on the Revere Beach project, which was a rehab project that went bad, and the city actually turned to the IG and said, what did we do wrong? It's very concise. It's only, I think, about 12 pages, but it really lays it out, what's best practices in developing an RFP. So you can either get it probably on the IG's website, or I can dig it out and make copies available if you don't still have it.
If you could, that would be great to see it again. Thank you.
My point there is that I don't think this is an advocacy committee for answers. I think this is a professional committee focused on putting out a procurement, which is a professional, well-done procurement that reflects our best shot at trying to get developers to come in with a response that the town would find attractive. Along those lines, if I could choose, I would look to add members who are, to the extent that Todd, Johnny, Adam, and even Ken were on the financing side of real estate, it sure would be nice if we could get some people or somebody on from the project side of real estate, just to, round out the expertise, so that's.
Or even construction.
Or even construct, what I'm getting at is not the finance side, but
Right.
the execution side.
Right.
So if we can find that kind of person, it sounded, Pete, the one name you had picked up sounded like someone who would have that kind of background, that might be at least a good candidate to consider. And, in my head, I'm saying that's 7 people on a committee. No, I'm happy to, my own preference right now would be to continue with the committee. And that's partly because I have some strong views about what it takes to have a good procurement for something like this, although I don't have real estate expertise. However, I'm happy to, and I also think there's some advantage for this committee to have close contact with the selectmen on this, because this is a big deal, this is a big effort. But I'm happy to listen to arguments from, we don't need to decide this tonight.
Yeah,
I'm happy to
I don't
listen
have
to
an argument on it
arguments
one way or the
from
other, I
anyone.
just
Yeah.
wanted to raise the question. I
Yeah.
don't, my inclination would be to stick with that as well. I just
Right.
wanted to make sure we talked about it.
Right.
And made a conscious decision in that regard, rather than kind of just continuing with it. I think, so it sounds like we have an agreement that we should put out a call for
Oh, yep.
people who are interested.
Yep.
And then I think we should try to design a specific charter and with something of a rough schedule for kind of how we want this to proceed, kind of what level, you know, where the public engagement will happen, so that we can give people something of a roadmap, so they know, okay, just as we had with, obviously, the special town meeting is a bigger event, but, okay, the committee's gonna meet over this 4-month period. These are the 3 meetings at which I can put on my calendar, if I wanna be at the meeting where they discuss the content of the RFQ, okay, I know I can put this on my calendar. If I wanna be there when they discuss the people who come back, I can put this on my calendar. A little bit more of a specific schedule than you might have normally.
The development committee is planning, I think we're planning to meet a week, the 11th. And what I'm thinking of, the hard part will be that the people that are on the development committee won't be all of the people that might ultimately be on the development committee, but what I could do is ask Todd, maybe one of the agenda items they should have is to kind of lay out their own, at least straw man of what they see the year being. Because just to be clear, when I talk about wanting professionals on the committee itself to carry out the procurement, that's not to mean they're just gonna go do something and then at somewhere down the road, just before a town meeting, here it is.
Right,
Do you
right.
want it? There has to be a public involvement process in that, and along the way. It's just that it's not exactly just an unstructured process we're in now. Now we're trying to get a proposal. It's a matter of finding the right times for the public to have inputs on what that is.
Right,
So,
right.
okay.
And then the other thing I think would be to reach out to the master planning committee members, let them know kind of tentatively what we're thinking, and see who would be interested if any of them would be, in continuing.
Yeah, there may be a couple that would be more appropriate
Yeah.
for this kind of a semi-technical job than others.
Yeah, but I'm not saying we'd
Yeah,
be offering,
yeah.
but I mean, if 3 of them,
Yeah.
if none of them are interested in continuing, that answers the question. If 3 of
Yeah.
them are,
Yeah.
we could sort of pick between the interested people. And I think, look, in terms of expanding the committee, we'll only expand it if we get people who have
Right.
skills they're gonna bring to the
Right.
table. It's not a matter of we're gonna pick an arbitrary number. I think 7 is probably right.
Mm-hmm.
If we got a surplus of people with, you know, really good skills and experiences, we could do it at 9, right? And say, look, or 8, or whatever it's gonna be,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
to say, look,
Yeah.
we've got more talent who's interested in this, and we wanna make sure.
What probably will help is if we can articulate what kind of volunteers we're looking, what I'm getting at is if you just say, who would like to be on the committee?
No, I
And we
think-
get 20 people, we're gonna have to tell 19 of them,
Right.
or 18
No,
of
I
them.
think you need to identify the skill set.
Yeah, I think we're looking for real estate, construction, engineering,
Right,
kind
right,
of
right. Yeah, right,
expertise.
right. Okay. We're good, that was about all the conversation that I wanted to have,
Okay.
right? Okay. Second
No
topic,
comments from the audience either. no?
any, Joel, John?
I'm saving them.
Hey,
I have a quick comment.
Microphone.
Microphone, please.
There's a couple of quick comments. Some people that are not from town said that they thought that was a really excellent example of the democratic process in work. They said people stayed calm, cool, and collected, and they got their thoughts together. And I certainly felt comfortable at least trying to express my views. I felt like I didn't have really as much time as I would have liked to have had, and some people had said that to me afterward, that they'd wished I had more time. But they did think that the process was very democratic. And some people also commented to me that they, and this isn't sour, not in a sour grapes way, but just that a head count for 900 and some people with something that close was maybe not a good way to count votes. And they weren't saying it
State law.
in a sour grapes way, but they were saying it seemed odd that you're counting individuals' heads. And I think that maybe that's it, Mark.
That is
I
state
didn't know
law.
that.
Chapter 39 of the general laws governs town meetings in the absence of a local charter or bylaws, and of the several mechanisms for a count, the most anybody gets is a standing count. If the moderator declares on less than a standing count, any 7 voters can rise and challenge the moderator for a standing count.
Yeah.
But the counters are all put under oath to accurately count, and
Sure.
that's what they do. It is
So,
what it is.
Mark, we've had paper votes at town
That's
meetings.
discretion of the moderator, or again, in the provision in the charter or bylaws, which I don't think we specifically address.
And I think in that kind of setting, as you think about it, because I've thought about this question, because we got a note from a person on this front, like, I think there's much greater risk of some sort of malfeasance in a paper ballot, where you're collecting paper ballots from 2 different rooms, and how easy would it be just for somebody to slip in?
You actually, to do it right, if you're gonna do it, everybody has to leave the room, recheck in, be given the ballot, and basically be supervised.
Yeah.
Mark, let me first off, this town meeting reached an agreement and the decision's made, and so that sometimes, some of that conversation, because I've heard it as well, is, well, it didn't come out the way, I disagree with the answer, so I don't like the process, but there have been broader discussions on concerned citizens around things like people, I guess there's, some of the towns around here have used clickers, or they have cell phone.
Electronic voting.
Yeah, electronic voting, so some form of a more technology-based vote that presumably if you had the ability to validate who's got their finger on the button in the room, that apparently some towns have done that. Would that be in violation of the law, or is that another discretion of the moderator?
It's, again, something to be addressed. It goes to the very philosophy of what town meeting is supposed to be about, open town meeting, which is why secret ballots are really the exception to the rule.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe times have changed, but historically, where we are is the fact that there was some thinking originally that people would come together as a community, would hash out issues and come to resolution, and everybody knew where everybody stood on it. So that was the original premise.
Right. Okay.
And that's the problem with the technology, and the next thing is people don't even have to go to town meeting, they can stay home. And then the flip side is, if it's technology, it can be screwed up. So then you run the risk of somebody hacking or what have you.
There was discussion of the electronic voting at town meetings, at the 6 town selectmen meetings that we were going to, and the people from these other towns seem to have rejected it, because there was some discussion about sharing the cost of getting the equipment to be able to do the electronic voting, but they seem to not be interested in going forward with that. I know that the moderator is talking about looking into other possibilities. He's very interested, clearly. in-
So,
in
John,
how
to
to
your,
do it.
yeah, John, your point, I'm good with you on anything that, when people say, oh, I don't want my neighbor to know how I vote, it's like, there's people out risking their lives to protect this country. Maybe you ought to have enough backbone to stand up next to your neighbor and let them know what you think. However, the argument I think, John, you're raising is an accuracy argument, and that's a different argument, and it's like, well, all right. Okay. Other comments? Next item we had was I think all of us here at this table at least are aware that Carol Mayer has announced her intention to retire. I think officially she's retiring on the 1st of March.
Yes, but
she
she'll be
has
taking-
vacation, so effectively she'll be retiring sometime in early
Beginning of
February. And that will make things interesting for the town with the number of elections that are coming up in 2020.
And the certification of signatures for
And-
candidates for the town election in March.
Yep,
which happens
of
in
which
February.
I might wind up being one of them, and I certainly would hope that I can find nomination paper somewhere.
So I asked Mark to look into what the process is for you where Carol's leaving midterm. And the Board of Selectmen can make an appointment to fill that until the end of the town clerk's term, which will be March of 2021.
It does not have to be a resident.
So I would suggest, my thought here is that we want to take the path of least resistance that will get us somebody that's as close to being fully qualified as possible, to give that person a prayer of being able to oversee, what is it, 3 elections?
Well, the presidential primary is in March. The town election is the end of
Election,
March.
the national.
Potentially, if we had any kind of override vote, it would happen in June.
Well, that's right, too. It could be
You have the
4.
state, you have the state primary in September.
Yeah.
And then
And
you
then the
have
election.
the
Full
presidential election in
election.
November. So it's
Maybe we
five
should-
elections.
And all of those come with early voting.
Right.
Maybe we should play an override vote just to give the new town clerk, interim town clerk practice before we get to the important.
He or she will have plenty of practice. Yeah.
My suggestion would be if Christine, if you have a recommendation, that we at least consider that. I don't know if.
There
Yeah, I
are
mean-
assistant clerks out there, towns that have assistant clerks that might be looking to move up.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, but ultimately, to be the town clerk, they'd have to live in Medfield and to come and run.
You'd have to run in March of
Right. So, I mean,
2021 for
my
election.
My thought was we
Unless you
should,
change things in the interim.
yeah, well,
We
we
tried.
should, yeah, I mean, I think, my thought, as I've thought about this for the last week or so, is that I think what we should be looking for is a retired town clerk from another town who'd be willing to come in on an interim basis to do it for a year, either because he or she is bored or wants to collect the salary on top of the pension for a year or what have you, or even a person like that who would be willing to do it for 2 or 3 days a week or on a part-time basis. Because really, the main thing you need that person for is for the elections. And so if you sort of took it, and you might add a town employee who might pick up some additional town clerk work as like an assistant town clerk, if you couldn't find a retired town clerk from somewhere else who wanted to do it full-time, you might get that person, okay, I'll give you the during the primary, I'll give you this part, I'll give you the, doing the return of the
Right.
warrant at the town meeting, the town meeting responsibilities the town clerk has. And then if you didn't have a full-timer, you could something that was somebody who's a town employee who would kind of fill in the hours and could get a little bit of training from that person. But I think it'd be too much to say to find somebody from Medfield who would step in, who hasn't, done this, and hasn't run an election.
Yeah,
I
run
think
it, yeah.
ideally, we'd find somebody who'd run elections before, who could come in, because it is, I mean, it's a tough time, and Carol's obviously entitled to retire whenever she retires, but, I mean, you have to do the nomination signatures, then run the presidential primary, then immediately work on the town election, and then the town meeting, potentially, an override vote in
And don't
June.
forget the dog licenses.
Well, yes.
Problem.
And then the state primary and the federal, so that's a lot of elections.
Problem with a retired clerk is under the Norfolk County retirement, they can only make the difference between what they're getting for retirement from the county. and
But you
what-
can,
somebody
do
outside
a
of-
part-time 2 or 3 day,
Yeah.
yeah.
Or somebody from outside of Norfolk County.
I think it's state. I think
Yeah,
it's
they'd
uniform
have to, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But we can look at getting some part-time assistants.
Yeah.
I also have the feeling that Nick and I are gonna become very versed in elections.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would just be helpful to have somebody with that experience, again, even if it were just for that piece.
Agreed.
Then there'll be an election the next year.
Pete, your thoughts? Anything?
I don't have a solution for it. I just, the timing is unfortunate.
Is she absolutely etched in stone for those dates?
Yes.
So are we okay letting Christine come in with a recommendation? I mean, what
Oh,
I'm hearing here
absolutely,
is,
yeah.
chances are, one way or the other, if we have someone in town that can do some of the lifting here, we want them to be doing some of the lifting. I suspect, like you're suggesting, Mark, that no matter who we found here in town, to expect them just to step in and do
Right,
100% of the job is not realistic,
Big
given
learning
the
curve,
elections.
which
So
is-
we're probably gonna have to look at having some backup from a retired town
Carol
clerk
was
somewhere.
Nancy Preston's assistant for a long time
Yeah.
before she actually ran herself.
Yeah.
There's an incredible amount to it, notwithstanding what
Okay.
some people's public perception is.
Okay, so Christine, ball's in your court.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't know if you want to put an ad out on or a note out on your,
So I already reached out to some retired assistant town clerks who have a list that they kind of generate to people who are willing to take on that work. So I'll start interviewing and talking to people to see if they're interested.
If we have the authority to do it properly, I would not suggest we go through a lengthy, like, public, who wants to do it process. I think we Basically, we need somebody here in January.
Yeah.
Correct.
It's
Yes.
not,
We're
it's
gonna
not like we
overlap.
have.
We
it's
don't
not like
have-
we have 6
Statute's
months-
pretty broad in
It's not like
terms
we have
of
6 months to do this.
flexibility.
No, it needs to be done right
But
away.
if Carol's effectively gone at the beginning of February, then if we need overlap, and
Right.
we're gonna have to figure this out ideally by, if not the next meeting, by the
Yeah.
very first.
Otherwise, you
meeting.
might have to bring somebody in with expertise on a part-time basis
Right.
to,
And yeah, and,
We'll come up with a plan.
okay. Next item, town administrator update.
So I just have a couple of things. Just a reminder, the holiday stroll is Friday night. We'll have the art installation at the town hall. And then just a huge thank you to DPW. They've been out straight since Sunday night, plowing, sanding. I know Bobby Kennedy with Mo on vacation was both on the phone with the superintendent and myself a couple of times at 4:30 in the morning. So just appreciate everything they did in the last 48 hours.
Thank you.
Very good. Let's see, we had two sets of minutes, only one of which I actually managed to get through, even though I said I was gonna get them both done after we met. So we have, the one I did get through was June 18th, so if we can deal with that one and defer the August 13th.
Guess I was
Again,
worse than
with
you. I didn't
apologies.
look at either one of them, I'm sorry.
Okay, I guess we defer both of them to.
I can put both
so
of them on the
I should
next
have let
one.
you talk first, and then I wouldn't have had to acknowledge my failures. All right, so they're deferred. And Christine, just so you know, I did send you the electronic, the June 18th minutes. I have kind of one issue we can talk about when we review
Okay.
it, but I sent you the electronic, and it was all editorial stuff.
Perfect.
So this is deferred, okay.
Okay. We need to set our next meeting date for December and then just start getting everybody's scheduled for 2020. Our first meeting is January 7th.
All right. Let's see. Oh, when is the
Calendar?
next meeting? When's the next meeting?
That's where we need to set the next meeting.
I'm flexible, so whatever's convenient.
So my travel schedule for the next month is terrible. And so, I'm not here on the 17th.
You want to do it on a different day?
Yeah, I can meet on the 16th, the 19th.
I'm okay, the 16th. Yeah, I'm okay on either of those.
16th is Monday. No
19th.
planning board meeting that night.
I don't know off the top of my head. I'll have to look.
Probably not, but
The 16th or 19th work for you?
I don't have my calendar
I
in
know.
front of me,
That's,
but
What?
I'll make it work,
Okay.
either one.
let's see.
The 19th, I believe I have a Franklin Town Council meeting. So
Okay. So ideally, that would make it the 16th.
I think conservation would be meeting on the 19th.
But we can move them to a new location.
Well, or we can. the
Concom
16th
meets Thursdays, don't they?
Yeah, that's
Which
what
is
she
the
said,
19th.
It said the 19th.
Yeah, but the
19th's a Thursday?
Yeah,
yeah.
16th is a Monday, 19th is a Thursday.
So should we go with the 16th then?
16th is fine with me.
If the planning board is,
we can always kick them out, right?
see if the
Yeah,
planning
we can
board-
move.
Well, you can probably move them.
They always say, we have these hearings. There could be a lot of people.
I don't know if the planning board has anything that controversial going right now.
Famous last words.
They're meeting on the 16th.
They are?
But I can talk to Sarah about moving them.
Yeah, you can move them to.
We can move their
I
location.
Police
don't-
station or
My meeting
DPW.
isn't the 19th, it would be if that's a Thursday, it would be it's the 18th.
So tentatively the 16th. And then I'm gone on the 7th as well of January.
Okay. I think you did tell me that.
So is there a better, actually in January, doesn't really hurt to go to the second week even, does it? 14th? That's only just, although it doesn't matter, but.
Yeah, and that's fine for me. My cutoff is the 17th of January, but the 14th should be okay.
Okay.
You want to try the 14th, recognizing you don't have your schedule, Pete?
Okay.
As with the 8th or the 9th, if you wanted to keep the first week, but I can do the 14th.
And I'm flexible.
So what's the December meeting night?
16th?
16th.
16th? And right now, we're targeting the 14th for the January meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
All right, we good there? Selectmen reports, Mike?
Target delivery date to avoid that.
I don't have anything. I attended the same, obviously, Eagle Scout Court of Honor you both attended, which I thought was uplifting and enjoyable as always. Other than that, there was a number of capital budget committee meetings that you already heard about with Sharon. Our next Dale Street Building Committee meeting is next Wednesday, I think, December 11th. And we don't have a next collective bargaining session scheduled
Nope.
with the police, but we'll still hopefully be done in time for annual town meeting now.
We do
maybe.
have a request from fire to begin their contract negotiations, so.
We have a request from fire to begin negotiations. Excellent. So I can collectively bargain continuously. So that's my selectmen report. Pete?
I went to an Energy Committee meeting. They're working very diligently to get the annual report into on the green communities. If we get past the initial report on the green communities, then we can start applying for more grants. And the DOER grants are pretty sizable. They're hundreds of thousands of dollar type grants, so it's important to get that done.
Is that annual report here yet, or?
So I forwarded you an email from Fred. He'd like you to look at portions of it. It's not completely done yet. But he's got some instructions for
You
you.
did say there was an extension on the deadline, right?
Yes.
So
Yep.
I am happy to be at Fred's disposal when he would like to reveal portions of that annual report.
He gave you a
I'll
link
happy
in
to
your
sign it
email.
when I see an entire annual report. Great, okay.
And I did attend the Suicide Prevention Coalition meeting.
You made it back.
And Pete didn't mention the Eagle Court, but the three of us were at the Eagle Court. One thing that, I guess it surprised me a little bit, Sean Dooley was there on behalf of both him and Denise Garlick, but he made a comment that just sort of surprised me. He was saying that we are the only town where all three selectmen tend to typically show up for Eagle Courts. And what it is that it was in the context of that. It wasn't necessarily directed at us personally. It was the comment was made in regard to Medfield and the importance that the town places on things like scouts who become Eagles and how much they respect Eagles, and not just Eagle Scouts. There's a lot of students, kids, young adults in town that do a lot of impressive things and thoughtful things. And I would hope that we, across the board, are doing as much as we ought to be doing to recognize the contribution they make. So
Town generates a lot of Eagle Scouts too.
it does, yeah, it does.
Huge number.
Yeah. But in a world where it seems everybody's critical of kids that grow up without caring one way or the other, we have a bunch of young adults here in town who are doing a lot of important things, to include people who come here to make sure that these Board of Selectmen meetings go out on Medfield TV. So maybe they don't always get told how much we appreciate they're here, and they don't always get told how big an impact they have on letting this town, or causing this town to be the town that it is. As I mentioned, I think the Development Committee is going to be meeting on December 11th, although I haven't heard that confirmation from Todd yet. He was trying to pull that meeting together, so we have that coming up. And then one other thing, I think it's a question probably for you, Mike. I got a letter from I guess it was the MSBA. It was basically a letter, and it came to me, and as far as I could tell, nobody got copied on it, directing me to sign the architect contract for the Dale Street project. So my main question was, given the way that it came with just me there, is, all right, did you just give me an action, or does somebody in the project group, are you working on an architect contract that I simply need to sign on behalf of the selectmen, or am I delinquent in not diligently putting together a contract with an architect?
No, the architect has been selected, and so.
And
Yet another
MSB, they make you use their architect's contract without change.
Right. No, I read all that in the letter, which basically, I'd love to be dictated to by someone who says, then we're going to give you a sheet of paper and we want you to put your signature down there.
Frankly, it's
But-
an outrage.
Yeah.
You know, that's my experience.
Well,
Because
anyway, the short answer, the first question was, do I have an action that I haven't done anything about in 2 weeks that's screwing this entire project up? And it sounds like the answer to that is no. The second is, it would actually help, I think, for me at least, I know you know what's going on. Pete, maybe you know what's going on too, but in terms of understanding where the status is of the project, the whole sequencing, as an outsider looking in, is very confusing to me. And the kinds of numbers that I've seen just get tossed around about the total cost of this project are extremely alarming to me. So having
Sure. Do you want me
having
to
some
get-
sort of an update on what's going on.
Sure.
What's real, what's not real.
So we've kind of moved through and there was a presentation, I don't know that the meeting was taped, the last meeting we had, but I think we can probably get, I can get the PowerPoint that the architects walked through, which was really, which has a lot of the timeline stuff in it. I think the bottom line is we have moved through the sort of state mandated, dictated MSBA process. So for the MSBA, for the state, they basically say, here's all the things you have to do, and it culminates in the selection of an architect. And so we have an owner's project manager, now we have an architect, and now kind of begins sort of the more public phase of the process. There's gonna be, a series of community forums, opportunities for input from the school department, from different constituencies in town, from the public, as they go to develop an overall plan. I think the timeline is, the idea is to be having a vote at a town meeting maybe in about a year. So in early 2021 is the kind of sort of dummy date that's up there. And so all of this design stuff will happen over the course of the next year. I mean, the two big decisions that will have to be made will be, where's it gonna go? And in the kind of, again, preliminary kind of, I don't know how an architect would describe it, preliminary drawings, they looked at two locations, one of which is next to the existing Dale Street School. And so they did a mock-up of what it might look like if you put a school next to where the school building is now on the field. Essentially, you build the school there, and then you tear down the school, and the field would be where the school is, presumably. And then the other option is for, to be built next to Wheelock, essentially between Wheelock and the soccer fields, roughly. And I think which has been, for a long period of time of interest to the school department. The second big decision that's gonna have to be made about the school building is about how many grades it covers. So the two different scenarios that will be looked at will be just a straight replacement. So just another 2-grade, 4th and 5th grade school building. And then the other option, which is what the kind of rough proposal of the MSBA is for grade 3, 4, and 5. And so it would be designed to have 3 grades in the school building instead of 2. And obviously, if it's going to be a 3-grade school, it's going to be more expensive than if it's a 2-grade school. The architecture firm that was selected is relatively new to the MSBA. They have done a couple of school projects. What they have done is they've done a lot of public charter school projects and in different places. And I think the MSBA was, the committee that selects the architect has 13 members, 10 of whom are appointed by the MSBA. So I think part of their interest was to have another architecture firm in their program. But they did. They showed examples of school buildings in a huge price range for different things that they've done. So I think that's kind of where things stand. I think there'll be a lot of work done in that next year, starting in January, because I think it's still unclear if the school could be built to be open in 2023 or 2024. But they had a couple of different timelines on there. But that's sort of the initial hope would be to do it in a year and have it be in this winter 2021, spring of 2021, somewhere in there. But obviously that could change.
So Mike, are you saying the target opening would be September 2023?
On the most aggressive schedule, yeah.
But when you said 2024, it could fall back to
To
another
September
year?
2024.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it'd be one of those two. I mean, I think probably,
Part of it's the funding that's available too, once
Yeah, and then the design, how much time is spent on the design, what state approvals you have, and all the rest of it. So I think they kind of laid out both potential schedules, and I think we can get you, we'll send you.
So I was able to quickly send you, the PowerPoint presentation from the architect is actually online on the school, so I send you a link to the whole thing. So you can read everything that's been done so far on there.
So a couple of questions, and this is outside or not familiar with the process and getting random information trickling down, both directly and indirectly. First thing, what I hear in your answer, at one point when we were first starting the process, I thought that process involved looking at new school versus refurbishing. It sounds like somehow.
No,
the
I think that
decision-
is still on they're still gonna look at the refurbishing costs.
So there is a third
Yeah,
possibility.
I think the
of actually-
expectation is from everybody who knows things about buildings, is that refurbishing will cost twice as much as a new school building. Like,
And
I
you
think- I
still
think
have, you
they
still
will
have
look
an
at it.
refurbished building.
Yeah,
so-
they will
yeah.
look at it, but I think the expectation is that it's unlikely to be a realistic.
It's a requirement of the MSBA process that they have to look at an
Yeah.
addition renovation as well as a repair to the
So-
existing facility. They have no choice. They
So
have-
will there be an estimate of what that costs to do
That will be
that? Will come
included in
out,
the
so that comes
entire-
out, okay,
that's
so,
included in the process.
so is that, then that is still an open question? It hasn't been resolved, although, I mean, without knowing anything about the cost of refurbishment, it doesn't surprise me at all that virtually every town and any contractor and probably, would say, well, a new building's better than an old building, so, doesn't, aside
it's-
from the
Well,
logic.
I mean, I can just tell you anecdotally,
Doesn't surprise me.
Franklin had a 60s high school.
Mm-hmm.
And they came in and went through that process,
Mm-hmm.
and it was, I think, going to be something like $60 million to rehab a 60s constructed
Mm-hmm.
high school. And MSBA came to the town of Franklin and basically said, we're going to spend that kind of money, and you're just going to have a refurbished high school. Would you be interested in participating in the model school program? And they offered that to the town.
So my question, I mean, for whatever reason, that's the conclusion, doesn't surprise me at all. I was only wondering whether we were at a point where that decision had been made. It's still on the table. Okay, the next,
Although I think realistically, everybody understands that that's not going
Yeah.
to happen.
yeah, that's fine.
It's just going to be too
No, but as Nick
expensive.
points out, Nick knows this better than I do, I mean, it will
Right.
be looked at. But
Yeah,
I think that's-
I'm not even fighting that, I'm just trying to understand where we are. And because one of the illogical things to me was that you pick an architect before you know whether you're refurbishing a building or building a building. I would not necessarily think the architect I'd want for a new building is automatically the architect I'd go to for refurbishment. So given that we're making that kind of a decision, that even reinforces my notion that this is maybe a legal requirement, but it's actually an administrative compliance issue that we're still considering the building. So that's fine. The thing I still don't understand, and this is again just my personal experience, is when this first came up a year ago, it was kind of casually described as a $35 to $50 million project. Within about 2 months of the time I heard that number, it was a $74 million project. And this summer, this is not anything I've heard from the town, but from the state, there was some memo that came through that referred to it as a $95 million project. Trying to conceive of a $95 million school for 3 elementary grades is beyond my comprehension. It's insanity. And so I'm not holding anybody accountable yet, but I'm trying to understand how numbers get, first off, are those numbers serious, or are those just kind of numbers that float in the air so we have the right order of magnitude?
It's staggering. It's the cost per square footage is mind-boggling.
Well, yeah, and so what I'm trying to get a sense of, is that just kind of like we're laying over, playing dead on that, or is that just fantasy? What's the integrity to that kind of a number being floated
They will
around?
project the number of students that you're going to have that this building is being built
Mm-hmm.
or rehab to satisfy, and then that drives the square footage. And then you've got all these required, based on the grade it is, for instance, for programmatic stuff, like, for instance, high schools, you've got a lot.
Something's fundamentally flawed. If
Oh,
if that
it's-
gets you for 3 elementary school grades to a $100 million building, there is something drastically sick about what's
Yeah.
going on.
I don't know how I know the numbers are not set in stone. I don't think that the number, I mean, I don't know what communication had the $90 million. I think that is sort of kind of the
It came
outer
from the
limit.
state. I'm not
Yeah.
holding us.
Yeah. No, I mean, an outer limit possibility. That wouldn't be the amount the town's only on the hook for, 61.8% of that, right? So I assume they're talking about the total project cost that they would approve, and we'd pay for 60% of it. So I don't know. The point, I mean, I don't think we've had any serious, I mean, the building examples that the architect outlined ranged from $20 million for, I think it might have been Franklin. It might have been the charter school in
The
Franklin.
charter school is real bare bones. I think it's
Yeah.
modular.
Yeah.
It looks like a Morton building, quite frankly.
I'm pretty sure it's modular, for
Yeah.
most of it is.
Yeah, so that was one range, right? And so they showed a range of buildings, right? And so I don't think any of it's set in stone. And I don't think the 3, 4, 5 thing is set in stone. And obviously, it's got to be ultimately voted on by the taxpayers of Medfield. And I'm sure the state doesn't really have any interest in spending more money than is required either. I mean, their whole philosophy in shifting to this new system was to reduce the amount of money the state was providing for school buildings.
So as an again, not claiming qualifications, as just an outsider using logic, the first illogic for me was hire an architect before you know whether you're refurbishing or constructing. The next illogic for me is here's what we think it might, here's a number that it might cost before we have a design or even specified needs. And I'm looking at this and saying this is a process that has exactly backwards.
We always were required to hire a designer for a feasibility study. We've done that
Yeah.
on the variety of buildings here.
A designer, yeah.
And they
an
tend to be
architect?
architects.
Okay. Well.
So,
Okay.
school buildings a little bit different, but typically if you're dealing with municipal buildings, you might have one architect at the preliminary stage. And in fact, at one point, you couldn't even use that architect. They changed the law, but you couldn't use them all the way through. So there was like an inherent conflict of interest there. But Mike's absolutely right, that this whole process has been totally revamped supposedly to save money.
Save the state money.
Save the state money. But they just manage to keep coming up with ways to, it's skyrocketing costs. Construction costs are going up because,
Yeah.
for a variety of reasons, and,
But, yeah, so anyway, I'm not starting fires yet, because I'm not in the woods and I don't have any kindling. It's just trying
So
to
Gus-
read the tea leaves this early, for this kind of a project, on an accelerated or not accelerated schedule. I think of the kind of work that went into vetting, like the master plan for the state hospital, for that matter, the kind of work that went into vetting the ALS move. This thing is orders of magnitude, no, not orders of magnitude necessarily above the project at the state hospital, but this is such a big project that the vetting process for this has got to be very, very thoughtful. Rather than just have something show up at the tail end, and it all boils down to, do we like our kids or not? And that's the wrong path.
So I can share with you, Gus, my experience, which was that the first year I was a selectman, the schools came to the town and said that they needed 3 new schools for $56 million, and I immediately said, say what? Why do they cost so much? And I then spent the next year going to probably a couple dozen meetings, learning why they cost so much, and they in fact did cost so much, and they are, as Mark says, incredibly expensive to
and
build.
we saved, as big of a chunk of money as that appeared to be at the time, we were so far ahead of the curve in terms of what that would have cost even a few years later.
63% was paid by the state.
But even beyond that, the actual costs of those 3 schools, we probably wouldn't have been able to do one if we'd waited any significant period of time.
Okay, well,
As
I'm just.
Mike Sullivan always reminded us. How we were able to do 3 schools for $56 million. Everybody wants to know.
And we had a and that's the other thing. There's a limited number of general contractors that can get the bonding capacity to do projects of that magnitude as well. So it's a very limited pool all the way through.
So a couple of years after the schools were done, I met Mike Gillette, who was then the town administrator at of Westwood at an MMA annual meeting, and I was just chit-chatting with him, and we were talking about, because they had built their high school, their new high school, what is now their current high school, at the same time that we were doing ours, and he pointed out to me that the chair of his committee was an attorney, as was the chair of our building committee. However, the chair of our building committee, Tim Bonfatti, happened to be a builder who knew construction,
Well, he has construction licensing and all.
and that was all and so, and our school got finished
Well,
like
that
a year or
general
two ahead of
contractor
theirs.
That GC went under. And Tim was able to get the project, get him to limp along and complete here. They defaulted in Westwood.
Well, we'll see where it comes out. I was shocked when I learned, the new project, the new school that went up on Central Avenue, I guess, in Newton.
Needham.
The big, or
Needham.
Needham, that's Needham. When that was going in, I thought it was a junior college. And then at some point, somewhere I'd heard, oh, no, it's a, Votech high school, and it's like, okay, that makes sense. And then I learned it's an elementary school. That is a hideous elementary school. It is an absolutely hideous, not because it's an ugly building, but because it's an elementary school that's this looming, huge monstrosity.
That school, from what I understand, most of the lot that they could buy in Needham, because it was the turkey farm and so much of the turkey farm was wetlands.
Mhm.
So really, it's built right up against the wetlands in a very small area.
It's still a hit,
Yes,
but
it does look
just
like-
the sheer mass of that school
look
as
like
an
an
elementary school is appalling. Not because it's a bad, it's because you're bringing elementary school kids into this massive monolith. I mean, all right, I started in school that actually only had 4 classes in it, 4 grades. But the thing is, it's at a scale that kids can deal with. And I just think we've lost something and I worry that some of this cost per square foot is the large vaulted ceilings with the large things that hang down and the dramatic entrance. And it's like, that's not.
No, actually, a lot of it is because you've got they redid the public construction law here. They did it in a very halfway fashion, leaving the file sub-bidding process in place. The whole process is just set up in a very economically inefficient way, so.
Well, I hope we're gonna minimize the negative impact of that. All right.
I'm on it, Gus. I'm on it.
I know you are, Mike. I just wanted you to hear it.
I would be so sad if I didn't stay to the end of the selectmen's meeting where I actually get to hear
What we really think, what we really think.
as opposed to what you say.
Jessica, I appreciate, because you do stay here a lot of times, and so I know that it's, the messages are heard, whether they're agreed with or not, they're heard, which is an important point. Yeah, the point isn't, you get the point, you know where I'm coming from, yeah. That's it, yeah. I think all we have is the informational sessions, and the only one that caught my eye on that one, and Christine allayed my fears, was the letter from the Connecticut Water Company telling us that the entire town of Medfield needed to have an overlay on it so that they could continue to serve Dover. But Christine
We already have it in place.
assured me that we actually already have all
Already
that.
have it.
It was just a
Well, what
historic
concerned me,
curiosity.
and so that's what I made a copy of that too, and it's not the Colonial, it's the Colonial Water Company, not Connecticut. But why are they're apparently selling our water to Dover.
Well, but Millis's aquifers are in our area too, so there's all kinds of overlaps. Aquifers don't recognize town boundaries necessarily.
I'm just excited with the 263-page meeting packet. You went all the way to the end.
I did. Although I started, once I got, usually the environmental stuff, I try to get the first few slides to figure out what's going on, and then all the extra stuff. And that very last thing, it's like, okay, so Marshall's has fixed their problem, and it took 80 pages to explain it. I didn't read all the lab reports, I can assure you. All right. Is there anything else?
Nothing else this evening.
Anything from the audience?
All right.
Yes. Yes. Microphone. Yeah, that's easy. You won't even know you're using it. Huh? Okay, all right. I'll repeat your question. What was your question?
What is the planning for the school buses? Is there any planning on where to park them?
So the question was, what is the planning for the school buses? And I believe the plan for the school buses right now remains the
Right
plan
now
that we
remains at
have.
the
So
Medfield
there's
State
no
Hospital.
change to the current plans for the school buses. That was easy. Got any tougher ones back there? Okay. I guess we can Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Yep. Thanks very much. We'll see you one more time before the end of the year.
You're watching Medfield TV.